Coming in at number 10, we have Aleppo. The 1138 Aleppo earthquake was one of the deadliest earthquakes in history. Its name was taken from the city of Aleppo in North Syria, where the most devastation occurred. The quake happened on October 11th, 1138, just one day after a smaller quake the day before. Like back-to-back violence. Due to the amount of earthquakes, the reputation of this blow is seen as the third deadliest quake ever. Took around 250,000 lives with a seismic magnitude scale of 7.1. The region sits on a triple junction between the Arabian, African, and Eurasian tectonic plates, which makes this place one of the most active in the world. Just 3 different plates stuffed beside each other like a long backseat drive. Just move! You move! Mom, move! Get out of the way. Number 9. Antioch. The Antioch earthquake occurred on December 13th, 115 AD, with an estimated magnitude of 7.5 on the surface wave magnitude scale. Antioch and surrounding areas were devastated with an absolute nightmare when the violent shakes triggered a local tsunami that damaged half the sea shelf. Gnarly. Antioch at the time crowded with soldiers and civilians from all around the world. Whole trees were thrown up into the air, huge structures collapsed, massive numbers of people perished from debris or even being trapped. The aftershocks followed the days and even continued to wreak havoc. Antioch was beautiful. These were Greek and Roman designers. It was nicknamed the cradle of Christianity from its longevity until then, and the role it played in the emergence of both the Hellenistic Judaism and early Christianity. Toll of destruction is about 250,000 gone. All those beautiful structures too. 50 years sanding a Corinthian column for 4 seconds of rubble. That would be heartbreaking. There it goes, huh? Okay. Number 8. The first plague. Yersinia pestis. The plague of Justinian, or the Justinianic plague, 541 to 549 AD. This was the first major outbreak plague pandemic. Fun fact, this is the same stuff that came back for the Black Death. The first old world pandemic of plagues. The OG. The disease decimated the entire Mediterranean basin, Europe, the East, and the Byzantine Empire, just named after Justinian I, who, according to historians, got the disease and then beat it during its peak nastiness. Guy got it and toughed it out. Nothing's tougher than a leader just like taping it up, you know? Just band-aiding it. This thing was nasty. It killed about 1/5 of the imperial population. It spread all through Europe, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. Huge part in the fall of the Roman Empire. Unfortunately, back then, no masks yet. No plague doctors, just neighbors coughing non-stop and a lot of anxiety. Number 7. Damgan earthquake. The 856 Damgan earthquake occurred on December 22nd, 856. The quake had an estimated magnitude of 7.9 and the maximum intensity of X on the Mercalli scale. Ooh, we're climbing, it's getting up there. The mesoseismal area was about 350 kilometers along the southeast Alborz Mountains, which is modern-day Iran. It caused around 200,000 deaths and is listed by the USGS as the 6th deadliest earthquake in recorded history. I'm not gonna lie, earthquakes are my new unlocked fear. It's no longer spiders. Spiders are out of the question, it's earthquakes. Holy shoot, dude, these are like the worst of the worst. So unnecessarily loud too? Like on average, it's about 60 seconds of violent shaking and debris. Every year there's about one of these in size, somewhere around the world. Every year. So incredibly loud. Number 6. The Mayan drought. Between 760 and 930 AD, millions of Maya disappeared from the earth. No, it wasn't all the impossibly carved astronaut pictures and knowledge of our entire solar system. But somehow, something huge had wiped out the entire population. Due to its geography and lush environment, scientists have been scratching their heads for millennia. But recent LiDAR and thermal scans have concluded that it may have been nothing at all. Literally, a giant nothing. Or a drought. Yeah, it just dried up. Like my mouth right now. Sorry, I'm gonna get a drink after this. Scientists noticed changes in the environment in which the Maya lived, and the ice core evidence from Greenland indicates that around the time of the Maya collapse, a long-term drought appeared roughly from 760 to 930 in the Kari-Ako Basin. Bullseye. Dude, they gotta worry about aliens, floods, and drying up at the same time? I'm officially done complaining about the subway system. No, I'm serious, I'm done.
Up next is the City of the Gods, number 5. Teotihuacan is its actual name. This sprawling ancient city in Mexico is known best for its astronomically aligned buildings and complex pyramid temples. Their building was dated back 2,000 years, and scientists have suspected a mixture of cultures including Mayan, Zapotec, and Mixtec built the city so that they could house more than 100,000 people. They adorned it with murals, and they had a transportation system. Evidence shows advanced agricultural practices that earned the city a reputation of being much more technologically developed than should be possible in pre-Aztec Mexico. So naturally that brings us to the ideology of aliens, especially as the most massive temple, the Pyramid of the Sun, which is one of the largest constructions in the Western Hemisphere. It's also been noted that the alignment of the pyramids is based on calendar cycles. Many people believe that the flat-top pyramid served as a landing pad where the alien secrets lay inside the impenetrable walls. In 2003 though, a sinkhole caused by a flood led to the discovery of the Avenue of the Dead tunnel, connecting the Sun Temple with the Temple of the Plumed Serpent. People believe that this connection correlates with rituals and contacts shared between civilizations and aliens, these tunnels being used to transport sacrifice or make passage between the communication stations easier. Its name was given to it by the Aztecs when its deserted ruins were discovered sometime in the 1300s. It had already been abandoned for centuries at this point. When the name's translated, it means the place where men become gods, and why they chose to name it that, we're unsure. When the Aztecs found it, there was likely a great amount of discernible history available in contrast to today's standards. Perhaps they saw writings and stories that we didn't, something to make them believe in godly powers of the temples or the peoples. We know frustratingly little about this mysterious society, from the conditions of its rise to the circumstances of its collapse to its actual name. The Delphi site of Greece is number 4. Alien theorists love to use Greeks as a basis for their theories. This is because of the possibility of life beyond Earth is one that began in ancient Greek world, originating at least as far back as the 4th century BC, when ancient Greek society had schools of thought that speculated extraterrestrial life. One of the favorite examples is Delphi, Greece, where the stone masonry is eerily similar to that of Sacsayhuamán in Peru, which is believed to be a site of alien intervention. This was also the famous site of the Oracle of Delphi, a prophetic woman who would reside in the temple of Parnassus. She was rumored to have sat on a golden tripod over a fissure in limestone where she could breathe in the breath of Apollo and communicate with invisible forces. What she was breathing in, we aren't sure. According to toxologist Henry Spiller, both of the ways an oracle's vision would occur, either peaceful and slow or erratic and barely legible, are symptoms associated with inhalation of hydrocarbon gases, aka she could have just been zooted. But with the architecture as a star, alienologists jumped to say that this perhaps too could have truly been alien communication. The oracle was said to be possessed by Apollo in order to be asked prophetic questions about upcoming war, political actions, theories of life, and more. What if it wasn't Apollo, but rather she was channeling alien messages through an unconscious state, that the fissure had been a beam of alien power going into her? Maybe that explains why Delphi, Greece is considered one of the 3 major UFO sighting hotbeds in Greece. In fact, on June 3rd of 2012, this picture was taken and posted on a UFO forum, claiming the image to contain a UFO. What do you think, faux or fact? It's Corral Soup at number 3. And despite its significance now, the importance of this site wasn't determined until decades after its discovery. Hilariously, this is because of the sheer size and complexity of it deceived scholars, and many believe that the site was more recent, so they left it largely ignored. It's in 1994, Ruth Shady was studying the site. She realized the lack of pottery wasn't because of the recency, the site was just dated before the advent of pot firing technology. Radiocarbon dating on some of the woven bags found inside the pyramid confirmed that Corral Soup were the locus of some of the earliest population concentrations and corporate architecture in South America, dating somewhere around 2600 BC, which upended history's well-established timeline, pushing it back 4600 or more years. Now since then, other Notre Chico sites have been found that date several hundred years earlier, but at the same time Corral Soup was being built, so was the ziggurats in Mesopotamia and the step pyramids of Egypt, all incredibly similar structures. Ancient astronaut theorists believed that they could be profoundly connected, especially following the theory of ancient buildings such as these that tend to average around the 4500 age range. But the largest mystery of Corral Soup remains why it was abandoned so suddenly after thousands of years of inhabitation. There's no concrete evidence indicating a single event like an earthquake or large flood that ended this occupation. Number 2 is the Nazca Lines. These are a little more famous, so you may be familiar. They lay 320 kilometers southeast of Lima, and they cover a total length of 13 1,300 kilometers of high and dry plateau. They're seemingly at random. Joining them are 300 geometric shapes and 70 figures of animals, including a spider, a monkey, a hummingbird, and a bizarre alien man figure. The biggest shapes stretch nearly 1,200 feet across and are best viewed from the air. Scientists suspect that the Nazca drawings are as many as 2 millennia old, and because of their age, size, and visibility from above, and mysterious nature, the lines are often cited as one of the best examples of alien handiwork on Earth. I mean, how would an ancient culture have been able to make such huge designs in the desert without being able to fly? And why? The longest of the lines run straight as an arrow for miles, so some believe it would have acted as a landing strip. Perhaps the art was meant to be gifts of appreciation to the aliens so they may look down at them from above. So, how did the ancients manage to create such a precise etchings from the ground without being able to fly? The only theoretical way is that people could have flown in the air at this time is with the form of a hot air balloon, as suggested by American explorer Jim Woodman. But we don't know for sure, so the Nazca lines remain a fascinating enigma. But the explanation for how the Nazca lines were physically created is quite simple. They're called geoglyphs. These enigmatic designs are made by removing the top rust-colored layer of rocks and exposing the bright white sand underneath. And for number 1, let's investigate the Sardinian giant. The Mediterranean's most important archaeological discovery of the 20th century was a complete accident and also unearthed a creepy conspiracy. When farmers are plowing their fields in 1974 in central Cabras, they hit something. That something turned out to be 5,000 fragments that underwent a painstaking and lengthy reconstruction process to form gigantic statues. 16 boxers, 6 archers, and 6 warriors. This colossal army of 26 statues has a height of 8 feet 2 inches and weigh an average of 880 pounds each. Each figure was carved from one limestone block alone. They have highly stylized features such as triangular faces, T-shaped eyebrows and noses, and their most distinctive features are their eyes. They're represented by large round circles that stare straight ahead and right into your soul. I imagine if they weren't built to be intimidating, they were anyways. Every photo I've seen feels like they see through you. This is one of the aspects that give the statues an alien look, fueling alternative theories about the ancient astronauts. What is certain is that the giants are surrounded by an aura of legend since their discovery, as they belong to the mysterious Nuragic civilization, which very little is known of. The lands of Sardinia are also dotted with their tombs, which are called tombs of giants. Why? Because they're huge! The burial chambers are 65 to 98 feet in length and 7 to 10 feet deep, and according to the various inhabitants of nearby cities, very large bones were found in the countryside surrounding their village. Some claim that they belong to men up to 11 feet tall. Legendary painter Muscus himself found the remains of a giant skeleton in a cave in 1972, when he was still a child, and made one of these claims himself. Interviewed repeatedly by journalists, locals stand by that any giant skeletons that have shown up or been shown to authorities or the experts when they are found almost always disappeared into thin air the next day. Sometimes, so did the finder.
Number 10. Surgical souvenirs. You ever go on a trip and you bring back a shell home with you, right? It's pretty cute. A little piece of the ocean to remind you of that time that you got food poisoning in Cancun, right? Love it. Put it on a shelf, hashtag memories. Well, Anubis, the Egyptian god of mummification, he had a similar hobby, it seems. Anubis historically oversaw the embalming process during mummification, which on one hand is probably a pretty sweet job. But Anubis, this ancient wonder that he is, he kept trophies from those that he embalmed. So word spread quickly, Anubis likes body parts, pass it on. And so in turn, for centuries, ancient Egyptians offered pieces of lifeless bodies to Anubis. Yeah, here you go. Hey, anybody want this arm? Here you go, nice catch. Whoever gave him the jackal head, great call. He's a big fan of that. He likes to rock that one every single day. Real ominous and terrifying looking, that jackal head. Number 9. The Devourer. I love the name. Right off the hop, the Devourer, right? Straight to the point. Nobody celebrated the end of days like ancient Egyptians. They celebrated death, for death was not the end. Egyptians would often engage in rituals for those who had passed, of course explaining mummification, but ideally after this point historically, your soul would then make its way to the afterlife and search for the Hall of Truth. Ancient souls have to pass a final test, but if you fail, if your soul fails, well buddy, I got some bad news for you. Or rather, the Devourer over there has some bad news for you. Yeah, the Devourer of Amenti, aka Amit. I mean, visually, she is terrifying. Amit has a crocodile's head, a hippo's body, and lion paws to keep you sweating and at bay. Number 8, the final exam. So say you want to avoid meeting the devourer of Amenti. Okay, what's the game plan here? What's this final exam that you have to pass? Is it high jump? If it's high jump, I might be okay. Maybe. Depends, on a good day. This final test placed the heart of the recently deceased on a scale. Being a Libra, I actually love this. Your heart was weighed against a white feather, which represented balance. Now, if there was unbalance, a mitt would then eat your entire existence. So, yeah, you best behave. Hit that thumbs up or else, you know. Number 7, first for everything. Egyptian gods created other Egyptian gods in creative and beautiful ways. Egyptian mythology says the first ever god, Ra, was born out of the sea. Ra, or Autumn, was eager on having children and creating other gods. But without a partner, and being alone and the universe and all, the process can be quite difficult. It's a lonely road being a god and all, so mythology also shows that Ra did end up having children. He created Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. But in order to do so, Ra had to breed with his own shadow. Yeah, his shadow, like Peter Pan, you know what I mean? And in order to give birth, said children were spat out of Ra's mouth. That's pretty bad. That's pretty crazy, but it's still not as crazy as a seahorse giving birth. Yeah, I'd rather witness Ra giving birth out of his mouth than a seahorse any day. You shoot them out by the millions. Number 6, the Lady of Terror. If Ra has you shaking in your boots, wait until you hear about the Lady of Terror. Okay, again, great name. Sekhmet is a lion-headed goddess, so again, appearance-wise, pretty jarring to come across. Now, this goddess got the nickname by controlling diseases. Now, on paper, that sounds like something we could definitely benefit from. But Sekhmet could also spread pestilence and plagues against anybody who pissed her off. So, yeah, not ideal. Imagine if your ex could control plagues and pestilence. You know what I mean? Wouldn't be a good time. You'd be Sekhmet's name is derived from the Egyptian word for power, which is just what you want in your local physician. Nice. Number 5. Ancient Greek fire. Okay, this one's pretty epic. It's not, it's horrible. It's pretty rough history here, but definitely interesting nonetheless. Greek fire was used by the Eastern Roman Empire from the 7th to the 12th century. Now, the formula for Greek fire was a closely guarded secret, which is like so villainous, but it's believed to have contained petroleum, quicklime, and other combustible substances, all in one soup. Just a big hot mess. Something you don't want to drop, really, ideally. Greek fire was delivered using a flamethrower-like device on a boat called a siphon, and it was capable of igniting on water, making it a very reliable weapon against any ship out there. Yeah, they would shoot hot fire through a giant syringe at enemy ships. Ancient history is cool, it's impressive, but it's also, most of the time, brutal. It's disgusting. My God. Number 4, mechanical clocks. Look, we all love an hourglass. All right, I love an hourglass. Playing a board game with the family, you aggressively flip that thing down. No better feeling, right? Tick-tock, sands a swirling. But why don't we have an hourglass anymore? Why don't we use those? Those are pretty sweet. It's a pretty amazing invention. Let's talk about those for a bit. During the medieval period, the invention of mechanical clocks revolutionized timekeeping and replaced the use of hourglasses. One guy's like, what? I loved these though. That's me, I'm the guy. Mechanical clocks were first invented in Europe in the 13th century, and they were initially used in public spaces, like churches, town squares, stuff like that. These early clocks relied on the energy generated by falling weights to power their movements. Yeah, you're not gonna have one of these next to your bed. Not for a while, at least. Mechanical clocks allowed for more precise timekeeping and helped standardize time across different regions, but back then it was scary. Back then it was weights and big things bonging around above your head. It's like, what time is it? I don't know. The only one we got. Number 3. The blast furnace. This one was also quite important. All these are pretty important, but this one's, wasn't used to destroy a human being, so it's good. The blast furnace. It's a medieval invention that revolutionized the production of iron, which is so key. We love that over here in Steamville with iron everywhere. I don't know, there's trains literally all around us. It was first introduced in Europe during the 14th century, and it quickly became a game changer. The furnace's design allowed for higher temperatures and more efficient use of fuel, leading to increased iron production and, most importantly, lower costs, which, yeah, blacksmiths love this, they hate this one trick. The blast furnace would also enable the production of higher quality iron that was suitable in wider ranges of applications, which again, we love that. We love when iron just stays in one spot. Usually it's how we like our iron. We made better, faster iron. I don't know, what a day. That sounds like a Daft Punk song. Harder, better, faster iron. This invention spread across Europe, of course, with many regions becoming iron production hot zones. A lot of blacksmiths in the area, a lot of A lot of beards. Single blacksmiths in your area. Just swipe. Here we go. Number 2, the printing press. I'm not a fan of homework, but I get it. It's got to be done sometime. The printing press. Of course, we have to include this. This was a revolutionary invention during, again, the medieval period that allowed for the mass production of books and pamphlets. I love pamphlets. Thank God. Love me a good pamphlet. I love flipping things only thrice and then closing it. That's it. No more than 3. Invented by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century, the printing press could reproduce text more quickly, and again, it was pretty cheap considering what came before. You had to pay a guy to do everything. That's crazy. You gotta listen to him all day? No. You gotta feed him? No. This had quite the impact on society and enabled wider access to knowledge, the spread of ideas, and it contributed to the growth of literacy, which again, we love that. Still leading towards that one. The printing press played a key role in the Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation, and it may or may not have helped lay the foundation for the modern world. So I guess, yeah, we can put this close to number 1, I would say, or number 2 is pretty good. And finally, number 1, flutes. Yeah, we're ending on flutes, the best, right? We had to learn it for 3 years in school. Why? Couldn't tell you. No idea. We had to do it though. Music has been in the air for a very, very long time. Neanderthals enjoyed a flute every now and then. Who would have thunk? They weren't playing We Three Kings like us, you know, but they were making music as early as 50,000 years ago, which is just baffling. The first instrument known to man was most likely our vocal cords, but the second instrument were the flutes of Geistenkloster Cave. They're the oldest musical instruments ever that have ever been discovered. Period. They were made from bird bone and the ivory of a mammoth. Yeah, if that's any indication how old they are, they made music out of mammoth ivory. Again, I still can't play the recorder. I never learned. I was useless. My fingers were too long. I'd always like slip off the holes. I got Jack Skellington fingers. I can't play a recorder. No way.
Number 10. Tea. I honestly don't think I could make it through the day without a cup of tea in the morning. The Brit in me just can't do it. But I owe this to China. Specifically, I owe this to Chinese Emperor Shennong from way back in 2737 BC. Now listen to this story. Once upon a time, Emperor Shennong liked to drink hot water. One day, while out on a march with his army, they stopped to rest and catch their breath. At the camp, a servant was preparing Shennong's hot water when a leaf from a tree fell and landed in the water, turning it brown. Instead of discarding the new liquid, it was presented to the emperor, who drank and found it refreshing. Boom! Tea. While used as medicine before this, in the Tang Dynasty, it really became a common beverage enjoyed by many. This time period from 616 to 908 AD also saw the Book of Tea, written by Lu Yu, which contained ways to cultivate tea, tea drinking, and different classifications of tea in details. Thanks, Lu Yu. You the best.
Number 9, compass. Avast ye all drunken sailors, and maybe Jack Sparrow, depending on how long the trial lasts. We'll see how it goes. The invention of the compass hails from the ancient land to the east. I learned again today. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? Not me. Way back in the Han Dynasty, the first use of the compass was accomplished with a lodestone. For those who forgot what that was from their grade 4 museum field trip, tisk tisk. It will be on the test later, as well as some vocabulary in English. A lodestone is a naturally occurring magnet and aligns itself with the magnetic field, brother. While only used for land at first, it wasn't long before it made its way onto a boat, where it's speculated it was traded off into the Islamic world and eventually the West. My only experience with the compass was in Minecraft, and it doesn't point north, it points to spawn. Boy, did I learn the hard way.
Number 8. Movable type printing. Fun fact! The first book with a verifiable date of printing appeared in China in the year 868, or nearly 600 years before that happened in Europe. While the printing press would come much later in Europe, the idea of being able to print identical copies without handwriting began 2,000 years ago in the Western Han Dynasty. You see, before this point, if you wanted to pass on the good word of your religion, or teach somebody something, or tell somebody about the past, or give secret little I love you notes to each other, you had to either do it by word of mouth or handwriting. Gross. Then, in the previously mentioned Han Dynasty, people began stone tablet rubbing, which evolved into carving words and pictures onto a stone board, lathering that bad boy up with ink and pressing it onto paper. And boom, that's printing. But then, in 1041 to 1048, a guy named Bai Sheng carved characters on identical pieces of clay which he hardened by baking, resulting in pieces of movable type that could be stored and used again later. And now we have printers. Innovation, am I right?
Number 7, gunpowder. Okay, sure, we all know what gunpowder is and what it does. After all, what's a soldier without his blam blam? A cowboy without his big iron, or a pirate ship without cannons? I'd argue those things are nothing without that. However, I'd like to think of a more peaceful use, and not just because YouTube sweats when I bring up pistols. I remember a long time ago where my father would get a bucket from the Schmoem Depot. He'd fill it up with sand, and we'd walk to a secluded part of the suburban area and launch fireworks. Sometimes we'd launch them into the streets, but that depended on how much rye he had. It depends. At least there was a bucket. Safety first, right? Well, none of that would have been possible without the invention from China. Gunpowder was invented by Chinese alchemists in the 9th century. Originally, it was made by mixing elemental sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter, potassium nitrate. The charcoal traditionally came from the willow tree, but grapevine, hazel, elder laurel, and pine cones have all been used in the process.
Number 6. Deep drilling. The province of Sichuan in ancient China, yes, like the sauce, was landlocked and about 1,200 miles from the sea. Because of that, they ain't got no sea salt. So, in order to get salt, the ancient Chinese from around the 2nd century BC developed drilling technology to get brine from deep in the earth, which naturally forms from evaporation of ground saline water. Look at that, we're all learning today. Salt is obviously quite an important resource, but the boring and drilling technology only got better and better, resulting in more and more resources to be found, like natural gas, which could be used as fuel. And in the 11th century, the Chinese had the technology to be able to drill those suckers up to 3,000 feet deep, which is pretty deep in case you did not know.
In our number 5 spot today, we have the Telharmonium. The Telharmonium is regarded as one of the world's first electronic instruments. This instrument was kind of like an organ, but it used wheels to create different synthetic tones. From here, the tones would be transmitted over telephone wires with the intention of getting the music broadcast so that people could listen in. Considering the fact that this instrument was created in 1897, that's a pretty cool invention for the time, so the fact that it once existed really is super cool. Unfortunately, however, the idea was taking too much energy from the grid, which led to it being just totally scrapped. Instead of finding out another way to use this instrument or just waiting for technology to advance to a point where this would be able to be used, they just destroyed it. Now, in 2020, not only does the Telharmonium not exist, but there aren't even any recordings of it, so it seems as though this might be one thing that's just lost forever. In our number 4 spot today, we have Ulfbert. This mysterious sword has been confusing ever since it was discovered by archaeologists. Experts were able to date this sword back to the Viking era sometime from 800 to 1000 AD, but no one could figure out how this sword was made, especially with what technologies were available at the time. It seemed as though this sword was made using techniques that didn't exist until 800 years later when the Industrial Revolution happened. So how could it have been made all of that time before? It is said that everything about this sword, from the composition of the metal to the extreme heat needed to forge the blade, it just couldn't have been done at the time, but clearly it was. So how? A blacksmith who tried to recreate the sword only using methods that would have been used at the time explained that he was unable to make it without resorting to more modern technology. In our number 3 spot today, we have Nepenthe. If you're a person who's ever had to be subjected to the process that is antidepressant medication, this one might just frustrate you a bit. The ancient Greeks and Romans discovered a lot of things, some of which we use now, and some that seem to have been lost but could have potentially proved to be exceptionally useful to us, and that is exactly what Nepenthe is. Ancient Greeks were known to treat the bereaved with this medicine that seems to have been some sort of a primitive antidepressant. It is said that Nepenthe was known for its ability to chase sorrow away and also to cause forgetfulness. There are many references to this medicinal plant, but at this point we are completely unsure of which modern plant aligns with these ancient descriptions, or if the plant even exists at all anymore. In our number 2 spot today, we have Stradivari violins. If you're a string instrument enthusiast, then you definitely have heard of the Stradivari family and the instruments created by them. These instruments were created between 1650 and 1750, and they were highly sought after in their day, and even more so now. Apparently, these instruments feature an unparalleled sound quality that has been found to be impossible to recreate. The instruments that have survived through to the modern day are now worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, so it is abundantly clear that these instruments are incredibly valuable. Here's the catch though, experts can't agree or figure out what exactly it is that makes them sound so wonderful. Some have speculated that the magnificent sound comes from a fungus that grew in the region, some think that it's the density of the wood, but regardless, no one really knows for sure. At the end of the day, the secrets of the family art were laid to rest with the Stradivari family. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Library of Alexandria. This isn't necessarily technology as we now think of the word, but this certainly was one of the greatest losses we've seen. This library is said to have held a collection of over 1 million scrolls, which are said to have been all the written works in the world at the time. The library was founded in 300 BC, and it was where the scholars of the time would come to study. When a person visited the library, they needed to give over any books that they had so that they could be copied and added to the collection of the library. It isn't exactly clear what it was that destroyed the library, but rumors range from Julius Caesar accidentally setting it on fire to an invasion that set it ablaze. At the end of the day, the building burned and everything in it was destroyed. What was in that building was absolutely priceless, and we can only guess at what kind of secrets it held. Unfortunately, many of what was in the library wasn't written anywhere else, so it's destined to stay a mystery.
Number 10 is the pyramids of Chichen Itza. These ancient Mayan pyramids are obvious ones to end up on our list. This ancient structure has long since been connected to aliens. Many believe that they helped build the structure, but also use them as markers for landing space vessels. There's of course a theory as well though that the top of the pyramid has emitted a powerful energy beam, enabling the ancient Mayans to communicate with aliens or other pyramids around the world, implying the potential of interconnectedness between multiple pyramids and civilizations that we'll talk about through this video. Number 9 is the Vastu architecture. These temples in India contain intriguing alien-like depictions carved on their stone walls. People flying, alien-esque figures, strange flying devices, the whole alien shebang. So one theory for this is that aliens visited ancient Indians, and these interactions are depicted on their stonework now as a result. And to tack onto that, some believe that when these aliens shared their flying technology, the Indian people began to worship them as their gods. Naturally, we circle back to the concept of pyramids and grand temples being built to having the ability to harness energy from above to communicate with aliens or other civilizations as well. But it's been said that these temples were constructed with specific design given in old Hindu texts known as Vastu Shastra, and the texts give intensely specific considerations to astronomy in its design, basing it off of all the movements of the stars and planets. So maybe a space laser being emitted from the temple isn't too far off. The gods, architectural methods, and advanced technology may not confirm the existence of aliens coming to Indian land, but at least can raise some suspicion. Anyways, the temples show similarities to the depiction of an ancient Indian flying machine called Vin Amas, which will be number 8 on the countdown. Script from over 2,000 years ago in India claimed dozens of accounts of people seeing these flying machines. They're described differently in some accounts: man-made wings like a plane, a disc shape, and a famous cloud palace depiction. The Sanskrit word Vinmanana, when translated, literally means measuring out, traversing. In short, it means some form of aircraft. When 8 chapters of this ancient document are translated from Sanskrit, they revealed an intriguing list of these features that the devices had, such as remote images on screens, remote sounds. To protect itself, it had the ability to disguise itself as a cloud or create terrifying sounds. The discussion on Vimamana includes various constructions to double as boats or even submarines. There's discourses on astroperic pressure, aeronautic hazards, and even dietary and clothing for aviators. These writings were no manifestations or metaphors. They talked about how the gods rode them, but anyone may ride and own one as well. They were treated as manufactured physical objects or even flying houses. For this much ancient text to be translated and have so much modern ideology and inventions, well, it must be aliens, or perhaps some ancient sci-fi stories, or perhaps now we see these objects with hindsight and try to fit them into something that makes more sense to us now, such as an airplane. But they're just anything but, and we'll never know. Number 7 is Stonehenge, another you should know to expect to see on this list. Now, I won't bring up things like the Easter heads since we have sufficient evidence of human craft, but Stonehenge? On the table, so let's dive in. The Circle of Stone sits in the countryside of Salisbury, and it comes from the Neolithic period, which was the final division of the Stone Age. They stand alone, a vast meadow sprawling for miles around it. Having visited Stonehenge myself, I can tell you that you have the choice of a 20-minute walk or a 5-minute shuttle ride. The energy is very void, as if the air is free of static and just doesn't seem to move. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but it does truly feel unearthly. These stones weigh an average of 50 tons and are over 8 feet in height. They seemingly dropped into their ring, no rhyme or reason in their placement, at least to Swiss author Eric von Däniken, who suggests that they may be a model of the solar system that doubled as an alien landing pad. How Stonehenge is assembled is unknown to us. There's no documentation, no other ruins, no artifacts. There's genuinely nothing but these stones, some of which were somehow lifted feet upwards and placed horizontally on others. There's no way to know what it means either, but what we do know is that the stones are somehow perfectly aligned with solstices and eclipses, suggesting that the builders did know astrological charts and were able to keep an eye on the heavens. That's if they didn't come from them. Number 6 is interplanetary, but still alien to us, hieroglyphics on Mars. We've always talked about and conspired about aliens visiting us in ancient civilizations here on Earth, but what if they visited elsewhere? Or we have. Ooh, sorry, that's ghosts, not aliens. Anyways, the reason for that is some NASA photos were released in 2015 that were taken by the Curiosity rover. It shows what looks like some kind of writing or hieroglyphic on the rocks. A boxy 2 shape next to what looks like a curved Y with 2 other extending legs are side by side. While we can't be sure what the marks are at this point, it certainly has enthused ancient alien believers who claim that this is yet more evidence that aliens and ancient peoples visited one another. But skeptics argue the so-called discoveries on the images sent back by the rover are just textures in the rock. Despite the temptation of reading into evidence found so far, scientists' understanding of Martian history is still unfolding. Questions up for debate are, was the ancient Martian atmosphere thick enough to keep the planet warm and wet for the time necessary to nurture life? Are organic compounds found as signs of life, or simple chemistry that occurs when Martian rock interacts with our sun and water? What's your take? Hieroglyphics and conspiracy, or do you think they're just some cracked rocks? Number 5, let's reuse, reduce, and recycle our rotten food. More questionable cure-alls. As I mentioned in point number 8, moldy bread was used by doctors for medical reasons such as medicine or gauzing techniques. This is because Egyptians, from what we can gather, seem to have figured out the antibiotic properties and believed the exposure of mold to a wound would better aid in the immune system for next time, if not at least help quicker healing process this time. But Egyptians also reused other rotten foods. For example, sour milk was also used medicinally. Believed bathing in it would help with skin disease or dryness. I mean, all that sand is bound to have a little bit of a chafy effect. Honey, which also happens to be a natural bacteria killer, may not have been rotten, but it was put on open wounds similar to how we use polysporin today. And while rotten donkey liver may not have been medicine, the Egyptians were quick to slather it on their head and get a nice even dye job. Number 4 in our countdown is a different kind of rotten, the casual neck. The Egyptians were known for their fascination with life, death, and sex. In their beliefs, the god Ra actually created the universe and the first 2 gods through masturbation. Osiris, another god who eventually came along, became father to Horus posthumously after Isis had sex with his dead body. Ra also had sex with Osiris posthumously, but it seems his use of onion juice worked pretty well and he didn't father any children with the dead body. Now, just because it's in their godly pantheon doesn't mean just anyone was necrophilic in ancient Egypt, but those who were may have had that lust arguably feeling a little more justified in their pursuit of rotten ladies. So, there was an issue with necrophilia towards the deceased bodies of Egyptian women, to the extent that their loved ones began a habit of letting their corpses sit out for 2-3 days before passing them to the embalmers, so as to dissuade sex. The logic was that the embalmers wouldn't want to have sex with the body that was already beginning to rot. I mean, they shouldn't want to have sex with the body in the first place, but I guess beggars can't be choosers. Regardless, embalmers were apparently common enough for the Grecian writer Herodotus, who famously documented a lot of culture practices, to make special note of. Let's take a break from the funky stuff to talk about a different kind of pussy. Number 3, the obsession with cats. Guys, I am super biased to this one. Don't know if you can notice the fine sheen of cat hair I rep, but I'm with the ancient Egyptians on the cat praise. Ancient Egyptians were obsessed with cats and even worshipped them. Believed to be gatekeepers of the underworld, these little beasts were spiritual and metaphorical symbols for Egyptians, and they were even believed to be gods themselves. The act of harming, eating, or killing a cat warranted a death penalty as a result. And while adoring your family pet isn't bizarre, the effects of worshipping something are. When the family cat died, every member in the household would shave off their eyebrows to mourn its death. And if a building was burning, people would save the cats before they even put out the fire. Being the first society to domesticate cats, Egyptians used cats for extermination aside from the companionship, which worked so well that their agricultural society dominated that of the Mediterranean for hundreds of years. Of course, there were cons to this obsession. For example, when the Persian invaders showed up using cats as shields, the Egyptian army retreated in fear of killing a cat, allowing the invaders to their soldiers and the pharaoh and take over rule of Egypt. Oops. Unlike other animals, cats were often mummified and buried in tombs dedicated to the goddess Bastet. Recovered cat figurines made of wood, stone, and bronze can be found in museums and collections all across the world. Number 2 is a modern day medical emergency, but to ancient Egyptians, it was just his time of the month. While it's astounding that medical accomplishments that Egyptians had made, specialized doctors, antibiotics, even surgery, you can see from their contraceptives in point 6, Egyptians didn't always nail it. In fact, the disease schistosomatsasia, we'll just call it by its second name, bilharzia, was so common that they didn't even realize it was a disease, and it infected nearly everyone. How did it slip under the radar though? The side effects of the disease make people feel sick, and it caused blood in their urine and fecal matter. Seeing as menstruation also came with bloody urine and feeling sick, Egyptians simply thought they were menstruating and came to accept that men had to do the same as women. Blood and urine became a normal part of growing up for boys, and Egyptian society was already very big on gender nonconformity, even having records of sex changes, so this really wasn't outlandish thinking to them. In reality, bilharzia was actually parasitic worms having a field day in their junk. Irregardless, a man peeing blood was even treated as a sign of his fertility. No better sign a man was ready to father a family than being infected with parasites. Man, what a trip this countdown has been. You may be wondering what can take the cake. It's the ceremonial circle in at number 1. So as prior mentioned, ancient Egyptians believed Ra to have created much of life and existence through, well, his masturbatory sessions. This was also believed about the Nile River, Egypt's famous river that flows 6,600 kilometers before it empties into the Mediterranean Sea. These ancient Egyptians believed that the flow of the river represented the frequency of Ra's ejaculations. Seeing as the Nile was the source of Egyptian agriculture, it was incredibly important that that flow remained. Well, it's 4000 BC, and everyday people don't exactly see their gods wandering around, so with their pharaoh being the personification of God, the duty fell onto him. So once a year, in the last month of summer, during the festival Min that celebrated the pharaoh's rule, the pharaoh would approach the Nile, remove his robe, and masturbate over the Nile River in a sacred public ceremony. He had a large retinue of men that would also into the river at the same time as him. Once the pharaoh and his men had, well, finished, any man was welcome to unload in the river too. It was believed that these cultural and religious practices would ensure that the Nile would continue to flow for the next year to come, pun intended.
Number 10. Ancient telescope. The Nimrod lens. It's a 3,000-year-old rock crystal lens discovered in modern-day Iraq in the mid-1800s. Now, it was discovered quite recently, but back then, this thing was like ancient technology. Today we have the James Webb Space Telescope. 3,000 years ago, they were more advanced than we think. The lens is believed to have been made by a Syrian craftsman sometime around 750 BC. It's the oldest known example right now of a magnifying lens, which is sounds kind of nerdy, but that's cool. That's kind of one of those facts that makes me go, oh, interesting, I like that. Up until then, everybody was just squinting a lot, really. We didn't have anything to zoom in on. The lens is quite small in size. It's no James Webb, that's for sure. It's around 3 centimeters in diameter and a focal length of 12 centimeters. So again, not James Webb, but it was something, right? It was anything. The exact purpose of the Nimrod lens is still up for debate. That's still unknown, but it's thought to have been used for decorative or ceremonial purposes, or possibly, hopefully, magnifying things to study small objects, because that's science right there, it's technology. The Nimrod lens is the first example of ancient optical technology. That's cool, imagine building that, that's crazy. Number 9, the iron pillar. Remember when monoliths started to appear all around the world? We were all talking about it for like a month and then we just stopped. What happened with that? That's concerning. This next one rings a similar bell. The Iron Pillar of Delhi. It's a 7.3 meter tall iron column and it's located in the Qutb complex in Delhi, India. Now it went up sometime during the Gupta period, so sometime around the 3rd and 4th century AD, and it's been standing for over 1600 years without rusting or corroding at all, which is impressive. That and like the Egyptian pyramids, we have no idea how this happened. The column is notable for its high quality iron compositions and advanced forging techniques used to create it. We still can't figure out just how that was done, considering how long ago it was made. The iron pillar is also covered in several inscriptions in the Sanskrit language, which is pretty exciting, providing valuable ancient history about the Gupta Empire, and also, again, in remarkable condition, which is super rare. The pillar attracts visitors from all over the world. Want to go see a pillar? I kind of want to go see a pillar now. That'd be a crazy trip. Number 8, the Antikythera mechanism. Computers today, we can fit them in our pockets, but ancient Greek analog computers, apparently you can also fit those in your pockets. Who knew? The Antikythera mechanism was used to predict astronomical positions and eclipses for calendrical and astrological purposes. That sounds scientific, wow. It was discovered in 1901 in the Antikythera shipwreck, hence its name, and it's estimated to have been built around 150 and 100 BC. Now, the mechanism consists of at least 30 bronze gears, and it was operated by turning a crank. This is, again, like ancient technology. This is amazing. It's rusty and full of barnacles now, but back then in its prime, this mechanism would accurately display the positions of the sun, the moon, and planets on specific dates, as well as predict solar and lunar eclipses. Some guy in the back's like, spoilers, it's tomorrow. Told you. The mechanism is considered a remarkable technological achievement for its time and provides valuable insights into the history of ancient Greek astronomy and technology, all in one rusty box right there. Think of what we haven't found yet, you know what I mean? I'm nervous. I'm so nervous. Humans are quite advanced. Number 7, ancient seismoscope. Zhanghang seismoscope is an ancient Chinese instrument that was used to detect and measure earthquakes, and it looked pretty badass. I'm not gonna lie, this thing looks pretty cool. It was invented by renowned scientist, mathematician, and astronomer Zhanghang. It was made during the Han Dynasty around 132 CE. The seismoscope consisted of a bronze vessel that rested on the back of a bronze dragon, with 8 open-mouthed toads positioned beneath it. Yeah, it's scientific, but it's also a beautiful instrument, right? Like I said, it's badass. So when an earthquake would happen, a mechanism inside the vessel would trigger the release of the ball from one of the toads' mouths, indicating the direction of the earthquake. You'd be like, nah, that way. And everyone would be like, okay, cool. Let's go this way then. Today it's a little different. Today it's fun. It's just graphs and charts. Looks like some avatar technology, whatever. No toads puking up any balls in any direction, so ergo boring. Number 6, the Baghdad battery, also known as the Parthian battery. This is an ancient device that would go back to 248 BC. Why am I doing this? Am I Italian? Am I Steve Jobs? I'm walking around like, yes, I invented this. Look at my loose wrist here. Why do I gotta keep these down? Keep these at bay here. The battery consists of a clay jar, a copper cylinder, and an iron rod, all of which were found together in what is now modern day Iraq. It's believed that the device was used to generate an electric current by filling the jar with an acidic liquid like vinegar or wine. I sound like Bill Nye the Science Guy right now, but then they would insert copper and iron components after, and then they would make electricity. They would make, I don't know, here, Tony Stark would make this. I don't know, it's crazy. The purpose of the Baghdad battery is still unknown, which is fascinating. I won't be able to sleep at night now, but it's thought to have been used for electroplating or medicine or as a religious artifact. And today we're like, well, we have no idea. This is the stuff that I love. Old, ancient, like this sounds like something from Breath of the Wild that I would find.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Anger, a Greek god. Many people generally look on immortality as a good thing or as a positive. In fact, it's well documented throughout history of people trying to achieve immortality. But in the times of ancient Greece, it was sometimes given as a punishment. In Greek mythology, there are plenty of times where a god would get mad at a mortal, and the punishment would grant them everlasting life, but that included a punishment that would literally never end. Like the perfect example is the mortal king, Sisyphus. He was always trying to be a smart aleck, and he would often attempt to barter with the gods rather than simply bow down to them. And at that point, all the gods were super fed up with him. In the end, they eventually cursed him to live forever in Hades, where he has to continuously roll a boulder up a hill. Once at the top, the boulder rolls back down, and the process repeats. Legend has it that he is still pushing the boulder up that hill to this day. In our number 4 spot today, we have cinnabar. Cinnabar is the common ore of mercury, and it has a long history in ancient cultures, but of course, there's one big issue with it. It causes mercury poisoning. This is exactly why it's super strange that this is the central ingredient to the Taoist elixir of immortality. The elixir, which was called Huandon, or the reverted elixir, it was believed that certain materials such as cinnabar or gold, when ingested, would instill some of their qualities into the body and rid the body of any imperfections that that caused mortality. Of course, we now know that unfortunately, most of the precious items in this elixir were highly poisonous, and they ended up doing the exact opposite of what they were intended to do. Many people died, including Tang Dynasty emperors, and it is said that this is part of what caused the shift from trying to find outside substances to create immortality to finding a way to harness one's natural energy in order to gain immortality. In our number 3 spot today, we have Amrita. There is a collection of Vedic hymns called the Rig Veda, and according to these Hindu hymns, Amrita, which is sometimes called Soma, is a drink that can give someone immortality. Rig Veda 8:48-3 says, quote, "We have drunk Soma and become immortal. We have attained the light the gods discovered. Now what may foemen's malice do to harm us? What, O immortal, mortal man's deception?" While Amrita and its consumption by humans has been well documented throughout history, the knowledge of where to get it has been lost. It is believed to have been some sort of plant or fungus, and the instructions for the preparation of it involved things like pounding parts of the plant into paste or to release its juices. It would sometimes be filtered through wool and then mixed with cow's milk before being consumed. Amrita was often said to have been found in mountainous regions, but despite there being such detailed accounts of its use, the true identity of it has been lost, and now sometimes ritual prayers will include an apology to the gods for the lack of Amrita. In our number 2 spot today, we have eating a mermaid. This is definitely on the top of the list when it comes to the strange. In Japanese mythology, there is a mermaid creature known as a ningyo, which is described as a cross between a carp and a monkey. These creatures lived in the sea, and they usually brought bad luck and stormy weather with them, and if one washed up on shore, it was thought to be an omen of war. This leaves me wondering why anyone would ever want to be near one, but as legend has it, a girl known as the 800 Nun, one day her father accidentally brought her the meat of this creature, and she ate it and was cursed with immortality. It was called a curse because she was horribly sad for many years after having to watch many husbands and children of hers pass away, which, yeah, that would be an absolutely terrible part of immortality. After being horribly sad for many years, she decided to devote her life to Buddha and become a nun, and in the end, because of her holiness, she was allowed to pass away at the age of 800. I guess maybe immortality isn't as attractive as some of us once thought. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Philosopher's Stone. Turns out this thing wasn't just a Harry Potter relic, it was based on a real thing people believed could grant the power of immortality. It has long been believed that the Philosopher's Stone could be made out of ordinary substances that exist everywhere, but we just don't have the information needed in order to recognize them. This is why in the first Harry Potter movie, Voldemort is searching for the stone. He's trying to find a way to live again, and he thinks the stone is the key. It is thought that this may have been created by a man named Nicholas Flamel. Yes, we just talked about him. Yes, he is also a character in Harry Potter, and he was also a real person. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have Greek fire. Greek fire is essentially the primitive form of napalm, and it was first created in Greece, you guessed it. It was used often and efficiently for naval battles during the Byzantine Empire. It was used and worked well for these battles because it was able to not only float on top of the water, but it also was difficult to put out the fire using water. The secrets regarding this substance were guarded so greatly because it was such a powerful weapon at the time. The information on what it was made out of, how it was stored, or how it functioned remain a mystery to this day. The formula to recreate it has been tried many times, but it is currently thought that the particular storage and some sort of pressurized delivery system are what played such a huge role in its functionality and ignition, and we have yet to figure out those secrets. In our number 9 spot today, we have Roman cement. Concrete is the most commonly used building material in the world, but our current cement, water, sand, rocks mixture is nothing compared to the original stuff. While our modern concrete was created in the 1700s, there was obviously stuff that was being used before. In fact, concrete was used quite a bit during antiquity by Egyptians, Assyrians, and Romans. The Romans seemingly used to generate the most, and they are the ones who really perfected the recipe that we just can't seem to replicate now. Apparently, the ancient mixture involved burnt limestone as well as crushed rocks and water, but whatever the heck it was, their structures were a lot more withstanding than ours are now, which has led people to question, how do we get that level of hardiness back in our modern day concrete? In In our number 8 spot today, we have the Antikythera mechanism. The Antikythera mechanism is an extremely mysterious discovery that has stumped researchers ever since it was found. This artifact was found 150 feet below the surface of the Aegean Sea in a shipwreck, and it is the oldest kind of computer ever recorded, as it was dated back to the 7th century BC. The author David Childress likened the finding to if they found a jet plane in King Tut's tomb. That's how bizarre this discovery really was. Due to the complexity and oddity of the finding, alien enthusiasts have believed for quite some time that it may have been technology that was passed down from some sort of superior being. This analog computer may have had a ton of uses, and researchers aren't 100% sure about all of the ways it was used, but it is known to have been some sort of astronomical calculator. It was able to predict eclipses and different planetary placements. The mechanism was able to calculate the position and running time of each planet. How would they have been able to create this without the use of sophisticated astronomical tools? We have been able to recreate this mechanism to see how it functions, but no one is able to tell how it could have possibly been created. In our number 7 spot today, we have Mithridate. Mithridate was named after King Mithridate VI, who was the king of Pontus. It is said that he was so terribly afraid of being poisoned that he, over the course of 7 years, adapted his body to different poisons. It is also said that after mixing 54 ingredients together, he was able to create Mithridate, which is said to have been a universal antidote to all poisons. The exact formula has of course been lost to time, but historians have said that it was believed the antidote contained opium, chopped vipers, and small amounts of the poisons and their antidotes. The antidote was originally created around 100 BC, and it was actually used by many people for centuries, and even apparently as recently as the 19th century. It is unclear how the recipe entirely disappeared, but despite some best efforts, no one has really been able to recreate it since the last known use. In our number 6 spot today, we have Damascus steel. It's possible that you may have heard of Damascus steel before, and that is because the name still exists, and it's used in reference to a variety of pattern welded forged steel products, but the modern day stuff just really isn't what it used to be. Historically, Damascus steel was discovered quite a long time ago, and it was used to make swords in the Middle East. It is said that these swords had the ability to cut through rocks or even completely cut through other swords, which is just absolutely insane. The exact process of how these swords were made has been lost to time, but it is rumored that Wootz steel was imported from Sri Lanka and used in the creation process along with other metals. Somehow the metals were basically weaved together rather than an alloy being created. This is what led to the steel not only being exceptionally strong, but also really flexible, and it is this process that modern day smiths can't seem to exactly replicate. The modern day Damascus products are definitely high quality, gorgeous products, but it seems as though the secrets of the past may hold something even better.
And while on the subject of their miraculous medicine, how about a medical mystery we may never solve? Were they colorblind? Interesting, I know. I hope I got your attention with this one because even I looked twice when I found the journal article on this. So this theory comes from a few historical sources and some historian opinions. According to Mark Bradley, associate professor of ancient history at the University of Nottingham, color operated in a very different way in history from what we use today. According to him, the Greeks viewed color essentially as the visible outmost shell of an object. So fire wouldn't be red, it was fire colored. Dirt wouldn't be brown, it'd be dirt colored. The sky would be sky colored. Skin would be skin colored. They wouldn't talk in the terms of abstract color labels like blue, mauve, chartreuse that we use today. This explains why conversations of ethnicity don't show up much in ancient Greece. That's some context for you. Anyways, a great example is how Homer, in his famous works like the Iliad and the Odyssey, described the Mediterranean Sea as a wine-dark sea. Have you ever looked at the ocean and thought, ah yes, grape juice? Homer actually only names a few color terms and uses the same colors to describe objects that look quite different, such as comparing the color of a seagull to that of a bush. Two very different things. So if this theory is true, it would really suck to see the world in a little bit less color than we do now. Another mystery, but one to fear, would be the unknown plagues. Anyone who happened to be living in Athens in 430 BC had about a 25% chance of dying in a horrible way, and historians aren't really sure exactly what happened. So the basics are, it was during the Peloponnesian War, and Athens was under siege when an illness broke out. It's assumed the illness was brought by invading soldiers in their blood or in their mucus. It's very 2020 pandemic style. It lasted for around 5 years, and the death toll was catastrophic on top of the war. Most of what historians know about the plague comes from the writings of Athenian general Thucydides, and what he described isn't anything clearly recognizable as one particular plague or illness, rather a combination of symptoms of multiple deadly illnesses like smallpox or typhus. Victims suffered from fevers, bloody and swollen throats and tongues, and finally violent excrement that drained the last of the life out of them. In 2006, a study where DNA was collected from the teeth of ancient Athenians swiftly buried in mass graves suggests it was typhoid fever, but not everyone's convinced. Another recent suggestion was an outbreak of Ebola. Whatever it was though, it killed a lot of people in a really bad way, and this was just one of the plagues that hit Greece. This was the only mysterious one, however. Here's an annoying one that would make things suck 2 times a day. Imagine asking for the time and someone replying, which one? Well, aside from those who randomly have their cell phones set to 24-hour clock, this scenario usually doesn't happen, but it did in ancient Greece. The ancient Greeks had 2 different concepts of time, using 2 different words, chronos and kairos. The former refers to time as we know it and measure it today, the chronological time. The latter signifies proper or opportune time for action. In other words, the right time to do something. In contrast to chronos, which is quantitative, kairos has a qualitative nature. Where there's a time, there's a place. Ancient Carthaginians thought kairos to be one of the most fundamental laws in the universe. In Aristotle's scheme of rhetoric, kairos plays a very important role, as for him kairos is the time and space context in which proof will be delivered. One watch on each wrist, ladies and gentlemen, because one will tell you it's 4 p.m. and the other will tell you it's time to dump your girlfriend. And by checking your time for action watch, you may know if it's time to get pluckin'. As you can probably guess from looking at the statues and other works of art they left behind, the ancient Greeks weren't a fan of bodily hair. To be smooth was to be the epitome of beauty, but whoever went for a wax in ancient Greece would have been in for a rough ride. There wasn't waxing solutions or razors. You sat there and plucked out every hair on your body one at a time. You could always burn your body hair off. That was a popular option, but I mean, you have your risks with that. Now, strangely, less is more didn't apply to eyebrows, where people were trying to grow a literal bush. Monobrows were a highly desirable look to be prized or envied, so makeup and fake hairs were applied. Meanwhile, for men, the smooth things still goes with exception to beards, which were a prestige symbol for men. Their grooming was of the utmost importance and also subject to competition between men, as all things somehow managed to be, which made the good hairdressers very sought after. Hear that? The bro bond between a guy and his barber? Ancient concept. So yes, while hair was considered by them to be the most valuable part of a human body that could be produced, and it gave the dead the power of their journey to the underworld, on the other hand, losing hair for ancient Greeks was not a negative thing. It was even their indication of wisdom, this being the reason most statues depicting philosophers are bald. And last but not least is Creighton's creation. I'm about to talk about something without talking about it. So, what did the Creightons create? A form of widely accepted and acknowledged kidnap, which then later evolved to become a consensual release by the father of a young man from his father's household to an of-age man who would be his guide to adulthood. In the Hellenistic world, it was accepted, hell, expected. It was always up to the older man to do the pursuing, and this is where the rooster comes in. Upon seeing the young man he'd like to guide, he would present him with a live rooster. In Greek society, this would have been seen as a gift hard to turn down, so few young men did, and so began the relationship. Think of the other name for a rooster, so this is kind of a really metaphorical gift. Anyways, traditionally, they would go out into the wilderness together so the young man may learn hunting, fishing, navigation, foraging, plant identification, and pore over poetry and literature. Later, the young man and his guide would return back to their home city with the young man as a comrade to the man now, living with him in the city to learn manly responsibilities there instead of the back 40s. But of course, such relationships couldn't last. It was customary for the man to release his young companion as soon as the latter started to grow facial hair, which genetically is different for everyone, so some men got away easier than others. The young man could then either continue his relation with the guide or publicly denounce him for any misbehaviors that occurred during their time together, which might as well be the barest minimum punishment for an SA to have ever existed in human history, which is why it easily tops the lists of reasons why living in ancient Greece would have been impossible.
Number 10, the Judas cradle. Right off the hop, we'll start with a bad one. I mean, they're all pretty bad, but this one is so specific, you know what I mean? This is a brutal torture device used in the medieval ages to punish those who were accused of adultery or blasphemy. Yeah, adultery. This is what would happen to you. Imagine this. The victim would be placed on top of a pyramid shaped seat, not really a seat at all, just a sharp pyramid, and they'd be slowly lowered onto it by ropes. Now the pointed tip of said seat/pyramid would penetrate their anything in this region at all bad, all rough time. And this of course would often lead to death due to infection. The Judas cradle was painful, it was intimate, and it was slow, it was horrible. It was considered an effective way of obtaining confessions from suspects. Even if they were innocent, they're like, sure, I did it, get me off of this thing. What the fuck? This painful and gruesome method of punishment is thankfully no longer in use today, obviously, but occasionally I'm gonna pop up and remind you not to forget about it. It's horrible. The Justice Department has things to fix today, sure, I'll say that, but at least we're not lowering the accused onto the chair of death. Let's leave that one in the past. Number 9, the choke pear. Great name, already looking forward to this one. Also known as the Pear of Anguish. The Pear of Anguish was a medieval punishment device used to humiliate its victims, really. The device was inserted into the victim's mouth, or again, other places, and then slowly expanded open using a screw mechanism until it reached its full size. Yeah, almost like something from Saw, just like that, exactly. This caused immense pain and often resulted in permanent injury, or, of course, as you can imagine, death. The choke pear was also used to extract confessions from suspects or prisoners. Despite its gruesome nature, the choke pear actually remained in use for centuries and was only officially banned in the 19th century. Yeah, you're like, what is this, ancient Egypt, Rome, Greek, what is this? No, it's like 200 years ago. Today, examples of the device can be found in museums, so if you see something that looks kind of like a choke pear, they're all fancy for some reason. Take a minute and reflect on these horrors. They used to punish men for homosexuality with a choke pear. Humans are disgusting. Number 8, scaphism. First used in ancient Persia. The victim here would be stripped naked and placed inside of 2 hollowed out tree trunks, or sometimes boats. But only their heads, hands, and feet were exposed. You were literally stuck in a tree. Now, if that's not already uncomfortable and haunting in the hot sun already, they would then be force-fed honey and milk until they were extremely ill. And of course, all of that happening in tight quarters inside of a tree trunk. Well, as time passed, maggots would eat away at the victim's flesh, causing infections and gangrene. And also, it's horrible. It's so uncomfortable. The process could take days or even weeks to kill the victim. This method of punishment was meant to be slow and painful. And of course, the typical ancient fashion, it was very public. Everyone came out to watch, serving as a warning to others who may have committed similar crimes that somehow deserve being stuck in a tree. No way. Number 7, the punishment of non-existence. Ooh, this one's pretty good. It's different, but it's definitely worth a mention on our list today. When we talk about pharaohs or pretty much anything from ancient history, we know nothing. I mean, really, so many books destroyed, that much time passed. There's countless leaders that we know nothing of, and it has a little something to do with damnatio memoriae. Damnatio memoriae was a practice in ancient Rome that involved erasing the memory of an individual or group from history. Just ever gone. Control-Alt-Delete. See you later, Brad. This was done by destroying any and all physical evidence of their existence, such as statues or inscriptions, and banning the use of their name. That's incredible. It was typically used to punish individuals who had committed treason or other crimes against the state, but it could also be applied to those who were, well, simply unpopular with the ruling class. Yeah, getting canceled, but in ancient Rome. There we go. Some guy's scratching your face out of a rock. He's like, nah, you don't exist anymore, buddy. How's that sound? That's horrible. That is so, I mean, cutting to 2023 now, yeah, they're gone. We have no idea who they are. The effectiveness of this varied depending on the circumstances. I mean, in some cases, it succeeded in erasing the memory or the group completely, while in others, it only generated more interest in them. You know what I mean? You cancel somebody now today and you're like, well, who are these people? What did they do? Today we do this, but it's just, you know, blocking somebody on socials. Mute. See ya. Number 6, Iron Maiden. Great, now Run to the Hills. It's gonna be stuck in my head all day. Not bad, honestly not bad. Hit the thumbs up for the Iron Maiden band. Not for this content, just for the band. Iron Maidens were tricky. An Iron Maiden was a device used in the Middle Ages, and it was an upright coffin-shaped humanoid-looking box with spikes on the inside that would puncture the victim when they were placed inside and had that big scary door closed. The spikes were long enough to cause significant pain and injury, but not long enough to kill the victim immediately. Ergo, horribleness. The victim would be left inside for hours or even days, slowly succumbing to their injuries and eventually dying from infection or, well, just blood loss. This method of punishment was considered cruel due to its prolonged nature and the physical torment that it inflicted on the victim. Because yeah, even without the spikes inside, this one would drive me nuts. Oh, terrifying. It's like the movie Buried, but somehow worse.
Number 5, Minoan eruption. The Minoan eruption was an abysmal volcanic eruption that devastated the Aegean islands of Thera. aka Santorini, around 1600 BCE. It destroyed the Minoan settlements, communities, and agricultural areas on almost every nearby island. The eruption was one of the largest volcanic events on Earth in human history. Tephra, which is airborne pyroclastic material ejected during a volcanic eruption, gives us clues about the exact date and has been aggressively debated amongst archaeologists and volcanologists for decades. Plumes of volcanic lightning blacked out the skies that led to a number of blacked out summers, resulting in just one long, freezing volcanic winter. Yikes! Canadians are like, yeah, I don't get it. It's like January. Number 4. Crete 365. Sounds like a sick techno band, doesn't it? Crete in 365 was a terrifying sight. The underwater earthquake, which is believed to have been a magnitude 8 or higher, destroyed nearly every town, city, and settlement in the eastern and southern Mediterranean, spanning from Greece to Africa and even Spain. Mother Crete. Yeah, this was a big one. Archaeologists have conducted numerous excavations that prove that most towns and cities in the area were destroyed around the time of the earthquake, which has likely occurred the morning of July 21st, 365. Geologists and seismologists believe that the center eye of the quake was off the coast of Crete, hence the name, and studies have shown that may have been the result of a reaction of all the tectonic plates at the same time. Dude, this is like Transformers stuff. The horrifying part was the tsunami. Just a skyscraper high in every direction. Yeah, you know surfers are listening to this right now are like, just saying, man, I coulda, you know what I mean? I'm just saying I coulda, man, I really coulda, you know? Number 3. Genesis. Speaking of waves and great bands, the Great Genesis Flood Narrative, chapters 6 to 9, the book of Genesis, good stuff, speaks of the universal flood myth, God's decision to return the universe to its pre-creation state of watery chaos and remake it through the biology and evolution of Noah's Ark. You know the story, we know this. You know, the zebras and lions and stuff. Composed somewhere around the 4th century, the global flood is supposedly a myth. Or is it? The Younger Dryas flood theory, or the late glacial interstadial, suggests that there may have actually been a sudden flood caused by an impact of some sort, resulting in the Earth experiencing a tidal wave of the century. An impact event presumed to have occurred in North America about 13,000 years ago. Huh. Although young in theory, and still being dissected by scientists today, the Younger Dryas impact theory gives way to literally every culture's telling of a celestial flood rebirthing the planet. What do you think? Arctic animals found in the rainforest, jungle cats found in the ice? Something's fishy here. Number 2. Vesuvius. In the autumn of 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius violently spewed a deadly cloud of superheated rock and gas into the sky 33 kilometers high at 1.5 million tons per second, releasing 100,000 times the thermal energy of the atomic weapons of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A key part to the fall of the Roman Empire. Cities were obliterated and buried under ash and rock, famously remembered being Pompeii and Herculaneum. Now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Vesuvius National Park left behind archaeologists a gold mine. The cities were never rebuilt and almost completely forgotten about until the 18th century, where the 2 long-lost cities were rediscovered and excavated. There's still got to be more cities just laying there undiscovered, right? Atlantis? Where's that at? Number 1. Shaanxi. Okay, this last one I'm cheating a little bit with the time period, but I think it deserves the respect due to the destruction alone. The 1556 Shaanxi earthquake occurred in the middle of the night, January 23, 1556, in Shaanxi, China during the Ming Dynasty. Most of the residents that lived there lived in yaodongs, which were mostly underground and low-access caves carved out of the rock and mountains. With the city sleeping in the middle of the night, the Earth's most devastating earthquake was just brewing. The magnitude of the quake was approximately 8 to 8.3. Yeah, that's massive. An absolutely huge 8.3 tremor. We still don't know how many exactly, but somewhere between 100,000 and 1 million lives were lost from the eruption, the climate, the famine, and the tsunamis it brought with it. Yeah, this is literally the worst of the worst. Ever. Well, there you have it, folks. 10 terrifying natural disasters the ancients experienced. If you like that video, hit a thumbs up or comment down below. Let me know what other devastating history is out there, you know? I like history.
Number 10. We're making a video about mysteries from ancient Rome, and you think I'm not going to talk about Pompeii's own Villa of Mysteries? You balking, mate, you balking! The Villa of Mysteries was discovered back in 1909 after being buried at Pompeii. One of the more mysterious finds was a wall fresco that depicts what could be a play or wedding, or maybe an initiation ceremony to an ancient Roman cult known as the Cult of Dionysus. We don't really know anything about what this cult actually did. They were obviously very good at keeping things under wraps. What happens in the cult stays in the cult. Or however that saying goes, I don't really remember. No one was allowed to know what happened in their initiation, rituals, or really anything. I mean, they weren't even allowed to write it down. But if that was the case, why was someone allowed to paint it on a wall? Make it make sense, bro. Make it make sense. Number 9, family traits. I think this one is kind of really interesting. There is a village in western China where the people who all live here, meaning their families are all historically from here, have blue eyes and blonde hair. While not exactly uncommon, I guess, the sheer amount of people specifically from here that have these particular traits that are different from the black hair and dark eye color of most people in China suggests that everyone who is native to this area may actually be descended from an ancient Roman legion. I have the blood of a legionnaire flowing through these veins! That'd be so cool. In 53 BC, Marcus Crassus lost pretty badly in a fight in what is modern-day Afghanistan. It's believed that the Roman soldiers that survived traveled as mercenaries, just trying to make a few bucks, and they apparently wandered as far as this village in western China. DNA tests on the villagers of this area actually do show that they are 50% Caucasian, which is super interesting, but we don't know for sure if it was these traveling for sale legionnaires that were the cause. And maybe I'm just a silly goose, but I don't even know how we would be able to find that out with some kind of archaeological evidence. Number 8, misleading. In 2010, we discovered a coffin in the city of Gabi. A coffin made of lead. It was also, interestingly enough, in the shape of a burrito, giving it the nickname Lead Burrito. You won't be seeing me going into Chipotle to ask for that one. Yes, I'll take one lead burrito, extra deceased Roman inside, please and thank you. No. The University of Michigan, the ones who led the expedition that found the coffin, said that lead coffins like this are extremely rare. But on top of that, this one specifically is incredibly heavy, like 1,000 pounds, letting us know exactly how expensive it must have been. The mysterious part comes to play when we realize we have absolutely no clue whatsoever who the adult man inside this coffin is. We know he was around at the time of Nero, but there is no evidence inside this burrito about the life this man lived. No extra toppings in this burrito, just lead and meat. Yum. Number 7, the 9th Legion. In ancient Rome, there was a legion that was known to be the best of the best the Romans had to offer. It was known as the 9th Legion. Being the best of the best came with being put into the harshest of areas to fix Rome's problems. So these boys in red were sent to England past Hadrian's Wall where they would fight against the Picts. But then, they were just never heard from again, ever. Now, the obvious answer here is that they got absolutely demolished by the Picts. The last thing we heard was from the year 108, and we know that the Legion had a pretty brutal surprise attack in Caledonia due to some Roman guards falling asleep on the job, which doesn't really seem like best of the best behavior now, does it? What makes this whole thing really weird is that in 121, there are some bricks that have the seal of the 9th Legion on them, which is about 13 years after their last mention. And on top of that, there is an officer from that legion who shows up as the governor of Arabia in 142. I think these could have just been survivors who were taken out of England after the best of the best went bust. But who knows? Not me. Number 6, Locusta the Poisoner. Nero, 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 you little rascal you. Emperor Nero was known as one of the worst, and he was also known for having a few people, de-lifed. What better way to do that than with poison? The chemist Locusta was the one who became his poison expert, but she's also kind of unfairly known as the world's first serial de-lifer because of that. Kind of unfairly because it could be completely true. We just have no idea. We know from historians at the time that Nero and even his mother liked Locusta so much that he actually helped set her up with a school dedicated to creating new poisons and all kinds of research surrounding poison. But we don't actually have any of that research. There is no proof of any of it. But she was executed by the guy who took on Nero's job after he was gone, and I can't help but think there is a decent reason for that. Maybe because of all the people she poisoned and helped poison? We will never know. Probably. I mean, we could. I don't know.
Number 5, scarab worship. Ancient Egyptians worshipped scarabs, aka dung beetles, the ones that roll a poop. Yeah, you know them. When we think of animals in relation to ancient Egyptians, we always go to cats first. But really, it was dung beetles that Egyptians couldn't keep their hands off. They were also known as scarabs back in the day, but Egyptians would observe these scarabs rolling around these balls of dung, and they would roll them along the ground until suddenly each beetle disappeared into their hole. Now, ancient Egyptians compared these patterns to that of the sun, which of course leaves at the end of our day, spoiler alert, and the god Khepri was depicted as a man with a massive scarab as a head. And he was also responsible for rolling the sun across the sky every day. And then, of course, he'd put it back into his little hole. Number 4, sweat perfume. This next one here reminds me of Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop. You ever hear of that? Google that after you're done here. What a ride that is. Here we go. Ra, the Egyptian sun god, he was born from a giant body of water when life first began. I mentioned this earlier in our list. You remember the whole, hey kids, giving birth thing? Yeah, him. Well, in ancient Egyptian mythology, many thought perfumes were made out of Ra's sweat, and Egyptians would cover themselves, just lather themselves in that. Perfume back then wasn't like the kind that we see now, obviously. Ancient Egyptians would apply oil-based perfumes all over their body, which mainly consisted of water lilies from the Nile. Today it's a little different. Today it's like Playboy Malibu, or like Axe body spray, or Lynx if you're in Britain, there you go. What happened, right? Bring back the sweat oils from gods. I would much rather buy that from my local pharmacy. Number 3, dirty trick. The god Osiris ruled over ancient Egypt, but it wasn't an easy path. Just like ancient Rome, there's always going to be a jealous brother. Osiris's brother Set was a jealous brother, so he tried to take out Osiris at every turn. One elaborate plot was so crazy that it actually worked. This was like a saw trap setup. This was nuts. First, Set designed a coffin that matched Osiris's measurements to a T. So at a party casually one day, Set challenged Osiris to hop into said coffin, saying that if he can fit inside of it, the coffin is then his. You know, like a gift coffin. I always wanted one of those for the holidays. So for some reason, Osiris accepted the challenge. He jumped in, and as soon as Osiris got into the coffin, Set locked him inside, threw the coffin in the Nile River. Yeah, and in turn, Set then took over control of Egypt. So if any of your coworkers want to show you a coffin in the break room, you should respectfully decline that offer. Number 2, heart eater. Like I mentioned earlier with the goddess of plagues, ancient Egyptians saw their gods as helpful healers, but at the same time, you know, balance, they would be quite dangerous. Khonsu, for example, the god of the moon, is famously known as the god of healing. Now, if you watched Moon Knight on Disney Plus, this should ring a bell. Khonsu also had a reputation for eating human hearts. I mean, ironically, it's the perfect scenario. It's quite balanced, right? Amit would be happy with this one. He heals, but he also eats hearts. So it's like, which H are we gonna get, right? The healing heart or the hungry heart? And finally, number 1, pet party. Are you a pet owner? If so, comment down below. I want to see what animals are running about. Which animals fill your house? We were always a dog family growing up. My aunt has 3 pugs. It's really the dream come true. I want 3 wiener dogs. That's really my goal in life. But ancient Egyptians, they fancied a house pet or two, and they were a little different. Egyptians saw animals as incarnations of the gods. The very concept of having a pet came from ancient Egyptians. Egyptians were of course fans of cats. That's common knowledge at this point. But did you know that they also had the same idea for hawks, lions, dogs, and even baboons? I thought dogs doing their business inside of the home was annoying, but a lion? Imagine waking up to that. I'd be like, ugh, where do I even start? Many of these animals were often mummified and buried with their owners after they had died, just like how today many owners cremate their pets. The little paw print on the tiny vase, it's always so sad. You're like, oh, who's this? Ugh. I'm not sure I would mummify a Shih Tzu, but you know, hey, whatever floats your boat, go for it. Other creatures were also specifically trained to work as helper animals. Ancient Egyptian police officers would use dogs and monkeys to help patrolling. Imagine that. Imagine you steal bread for your family and you look back and a baboon is chasing you down.
Imagine living somewhere where you could literally be asked, hey, could you die over there please? Called prohibition of death laws. They've shown up through history and around the world, and some argue that not much action is taken to enforce or punish violators, but that's because it'd be kinda hard, right? Well, this is the island of Delos, considered a holy site by the ancient Greeks. You can see many of the old temples and statues that were erected in worship of the gods there. Check her out, she's a beaut, Clark. Classic architecture, clear teal waters, and dream vacay. No better place than to die. Until the 6th century BC, when a whack-job tyrant named Pisistratus ordered all of his soldiers, serfs, workers, whatever, to remove every dead body from the island as they had rendered it impure.
here. Shovels in hands, they really did remove the dead bodies one by one until they felt they were all gone. I doubt you can actually remove all the dead bodies from any piece of land, but I imagine they probably got pretty damn close. And from there it became law in the Greek kingdom that it was illegal to die on the island of Delos. I guess if you drop dead, they just like leave a find on your body, tuck it in your belt loop maybe, all saucy like, who knows. This wasn't the only place this happened though. Check out the coastal town of Le Lavador, France. Sheesh, what is up with not being able to die in luxury? This is nice! Anyways, due to the disputes over the crowded cemeteries, ordinances to build new cemeteries, and conflicts with local environmentalists, the mayor just tossed his hands up and said, you know what? If nobody can share, nobody gets any, and passed a law forbidding residents from dying. See guys, this is why we use our words and our listening ears. For everyone who makes fun of people's height, just know the courts will favor a short king. You should never make fun of someone for something they can't control, and height is a big one. Men especially face a lot of scrutiny and rejection for it, and we're at a point where nowadays, if you're literally 5'8", people will say you're short. Gentlemen, that is not the case. So, if you've ever been called short, listen to this. According to the 18 Laws of Qin, a set of legal codes written on bamboo slips that were unearthed in the Hubei province in 1975, during the Qin dynasty of China, there was a law stipulating that men and women shorter than the height 1.52 meters do not have to bear any criminal responsibility for any crimes they committed. Apparently, this was because the household registration system, known as hukoi today, was incomplete at the time, so it was often impossible to verify a person's age. So, the government used height. The founder of the Qin dynasty himself, Qin Shi Huang, apparently only reached 1.5 meters tall, that's 5 feet, when he was 22. So he allegedly believed that his subjects could only be defined as adults once they grew taller than that. So yeah, short kings prevail. Nothing is more freaky than government-mandated furry costume. Europe really tried just about anything in the way of public shaming to air out someone's criminal history. Unlike China or Japan, which literally tattooed faces, the Ottomans who cut off hands, or even their European ancestors who chopped off noses and ears, the 17th and 18th century Europeans took a new tactic: shame masks. The uncomfortable apparel was made out of solid metal and would have been painful and super heavy when strapped tightly to your face. Naturally, it's abrasive, it's rusty, it's riddled with tetanus. But don't worry, there are lots of cool styles, like these jaunty pagan god looking dudes. As mentioned, there are these weird animal heads like medieval furry getup. This one's a rooster, and apparently to quote, those who were, well, the other name for a rooster, swaggering and vainglorious, would be forced to wear a rooster mask for hours, even a day. Which may not sound that bad, but again, chafy, hot, heavy cast iron, the pressure of which is on your scalp and your collarbones. And apart from these terrifying masks, criminals were given humiliating badges they had to wear for, yeah, rest of their life. Next up, we got the M&M's trial by ordeals, and by M&M I mean medieval and Mesopotamia, not the M&M candy franchise out here trialing people by fire. And while I may be joking around, these trials were no joke. If you stole a bunch of crap and you were caught, they just hang you, no questions asked. But when ordeals are deemed appropriate for the crime committed, well, they weren't effing around. You were about to go through the holy test ringer, and your punishment if failed was excommunication from the church, because God clearly didn't believe in your good name. Kinda like a Mean Girls Regina George burn book. But that was just the beginning. There were 3 types of ordeals for medieval Europe: being tossed in cold water, and if you think you're innocent, float you're guilty, makes sense. Hot water ordeal requires you to pick a stone from boiling water and heal from those burns in 3 days if you want to be innocent. And finally, hot iron, because being able to carry a pound of boiling iron meant you were righteous. Did literally anyone pass that? Meanwhile, trial and ordeal in Mesopotamia allowed the gods to decide criminal accusations, in which case I hope they all learned how to float or swim young, because God came in the form of a rapid river. The law goes as follows: if anyone bring an accusation against a man, the accused go to the river and leaps in the river. If he sinks in the river, his accused shall take possession of his house. But if the river proves that the accused is not guilty and he escapes unhurt, then he who has brought the accusation shall be put to death, and the guy who jumped in the river gets to take the house of the accuser, whatever. So what I'm hearing is, welcome everyone to Mesopotamia's favorite game show, Drown or Win a House, where contestants go before the court, their gods, and one rapid river to face off the ultimate test. Are they innocent or guilty? And now for a punishment I don't even want to know how they discovered: tickly lickly torture. Some names are misleading and others are quite on the nose. This is a beautiful middle ground of both. So the victims are laid out in front of a goat, their feet are covered in salt water. Goats love them salt and they love sodium, so they lick and lick at the sole of his foot. And fun fact for you guys who aren't out here feeling goat tongues up often or haven't eaten Manish water, they're pretty much like giant cat tongues. So rough that once the skin is pruny from a couple batches of the salt water and goat spit, the abrasive tongue will literally rip layers of skin off the foot. There's been cases of this method going so far that goat licked to expose the bones. The punishment was only ever rumored to be used in medieval France, and it's only ever described in a 1502 Italian document.
Number 5. Silk. I, for one, was always too broke to afford silk, especially after fireworks. Those bad boys are super expensive. Silk was an important thing in ancient China for the main reason that they invented the process of harvesting silk and were keeping it an ancient Chinese secret. Now, when you have a stockpile of a very valuable raw material that nobody else can get their hands on, and you have a stockpile of the finished product of which is a quality of clothing no one else can match, well, you're gonna be quite wealthy. Well, I don't need to pitch this in the Shark Tank. It's time to start selling and trading, and that's just what China did. This was a very profitable trade, so it got its own road, or roads. The Silk Road wasn't just one. The people who were buying from China loved it so much they wanted their own instead of paying exuberant prices. But it took them a long time to figure out what the process actually was. They thought it grew on trees. It comes from
Number 4. Acupuncture. Have you ever had acupuncture done? Have you ever had acupuncture done?
I've done.
Neither have I. Let us know in the comments. I want to know if it actually works. When I was looking up this topic, it was called pseudoscience and said that there was no actual scientific proof that it works. Whether it does or doesn't, the practice of acupuncture is ancient. We know this from a less ancient book called the Neijing that was written around 305 BC to 204 BC and was the earliest book of Chinese medicine we know of. It was also called the classic of internal medicine of the Yellow Emperor. Who was the Yellow Emperor? Well, that would be Huang Di, whose period lasted from 2697 to 2597 BC. And this guy, this emperor, revolutionized the practice of acupuncture. So all of that was a very long-winded way of saying that acupuncture as a practice has been around for more than 4,722 years. Look, writing videos is hard, okay? Just give me a break.
Number 3. Earthquake detector. Earthquakes are a big problem. It's an issue in California as they're still waiting for the big one. It's a problem in Pokemon, when the gym leader I thought was going to be easy surprised me with an earthquake and like one-shots my team. And it was a problem in ancient China. I've already experienced one before myself in real life, and if I had to describe to anyone what it felt like the ground was a waterbed. Some of you are probably not going to know what a waterbed is, but that's what it felt like. Well, it was so much of an issue that Zhang Heng made the groundbreaking invention of a seismometer, a device that can detect ground movement. It can't predict them, but it can tell you where they're coming from, using vibrations and tiny balls that would fall into frog-shaped cups depending on which direction it was coming from. Something that goes hand in hand with the compass from earlier. Interesting.
Number 2. Beer. First tea, now beer? Oh, wait, no. First beer. The earliest recorded consumption of beer was in China 9,000 years ago. I could kiss these people. 2 of my favorite beverages. That's it, I'm moving back in time to ancient China. Only this beer wasn't exactly the same as the kind of beer we would think of made of barley. They used rice, hawthorn, honey, and grapes to make their beer. This 4 or 5% alcohol was mentioned in inscriptions from the Shang dynasty, so that would be 1600 BC to 1046 BC. But pottery from around 7000 BC contains traces of this same kind of alcohol. That's before even the Egyptian pharaohs. And 3,500 to 4,000 years before the Sumerians created the Western modern-day interpretation of beer. The liquid was known as zhu in Chinese and is often used as a spiritual offering to the heavens and the earth or to ancestors. And you know what? It still is, baby.
Number 1. Paper money. The Jiaozi currency was the first time in history we used paper money. The stacks, the wad, the dough, the shkarol, the Benjamins, the Bordens, dead presidents, and the bread. There's no greater feeling than walking into a mall with a wad of cash, is there? JCPenney, here I come. Well, we have ancient China to thank for that. Well, sort of. Coins and metal were still more common and used for hundreds of more years before we started printing. In reality, the paper makes more sense. Before printing, coins could have been manipulated into making doubles or counterfeit. there wasn't a press yet. But with paper, it could be issued certain identifiers and used for certain things. The problem with the Jowsey money is that it wasn't backed by anything, so it did cause a little bit of what my generation knows too much, inflation.
Number 10 is the Pet Patrol. Do you guys remember the scene in Disney's Aladdin where he steals a piece of fruit and miraculously evades capture? Well, in real ancient Egypt, our prince wouldn't have stood a chance, as police in Egypt used baboons to catch thieves. Incredibly intelligent, these animals were able to be trained, which paired with their speed and ability to jump to places that are difficult for humans to reach, made them the perfect crime fighters. Baboons could also easily remember the face of any thief, as they are ranked 3rd in the animal world for their memory. So don't go relying on any luck to get away with anything. Outside of their police duties, they were treated incredibly kindly, but trained to participate in picking fruit, making beer, and even dancing. Baboons were so beloved by Egyptians that some mummies were later found to have tattoos of baboons on their bodies. In ancient Egyptian mythology, baboons are best known for their association with Thoth, the god of wisdom. However, they were linked to many other gods as well. Definitely nothing like Babu in Aladdin. But wait, did I say tattoo? Well, being inked up is no modern phenomena. Number 9 is tatted up tuts. Egyptians join indigenous, Nordic, African, and many other cultures of having a history of tattooing. Now, Egyptian tattooing was bizarre just because it was exclusive to only women. By tattooing in public regions of the body, the tattoos were intended to permanently mark the woman's association with religious worship, or on the flip side, they could also be used to symbolize the lower class and the mark of a dancing girl or a prostitute. That's what also makes it so bizarre. We can't really figure out why it was only women, what they meant, or what they symbolized beyond the vague generalization I just gave you. Tattooed mummies dating back to the 11th century dynasty have been found by archaeologists, some with religious symbolism, other with dots and swirls located on the lower chest, the abdominal, and the thighs. Some mummies were believed to have been tattooed with medical symbols, potentially to treat ailments. Although the meaning of ancient Egyptian tattoos may be unclear, it seems evident that they had an array of implications and that women of many different social classes chose to wear them. Baddies. Speaking of things we can't understand, number 8 in our countdown is my favorite pun yet. I put that shit on everything. Except quite literally. Egyptian doctors used human and animal excrement as a cure-all remedy for diseases and injuries. According to Eber's papyrus recording in 1500 BC, animal feces such as donkey, dog, gazelle, and fly were all celebrated for their healing properties and considered to ward off bad spirits. While we know that Egyptian medicine was incredibly advanced, even having doctors who were specialists, you can't help but question this logic. However, like with most things the Egyptians did, technically they weren't wrong. Research shows that microflora found in some types of animal dung contain antibiotic substances. So sure, you risk some tetanus, but you could also be cured. Lizard blood, dead mice, mud, moldy bread were also all used as topical ointments and dressings, and women were also sometimes dosed with horse saliva as a cure for low libido. And speaking of a woman's libido, man, did the Egyptians have some crazy women's healthcare going on. Number 7, we'll call the fertility games. I have a newfound appreciation for modern medicine after learning a way our ancient Egyptian friends tested fertility was by placing a garlic or onion clove inside of a woman's. This is because ancient Egyptians believed that all orifices of a woman were connected, kinda like subway tunnels. Anyways, if the doctor could smell garlic on your breath the next morning, then the tubes were clear and the woman was fertile. But if the doctor couldn't smell garlic, then the tubes were blocked and it was assumed that the woman couldn't give birth. Once you are pregnant though, you can find out the sex of your baby in another bizarre tradition, popping a squat over some barley. Why? Because if it barely grew, then the baby was a boy. If the barley grew like crazy, then the baby was a girl. This test was believed to be highly accurate, and they weren't wrong in that. Turns out the test was actually accurate in 70% of all cases, and in 1963 lab testing, the urine of a pregnant woman did cause the seeds to sprout. Since she was in fact pregnant with a girl, it's likely the seeds start to grow faster due to elevated levels of estrogen, which stimulates growth. I can think of some truly hilarious ways to integrate this into a gender reveal party. But kids aren't for everyone, and that's okay. Ancient Egyptians were notoriously not fans of them, so let's talk number 6, safe sex. There are actually lots of stories of Egyptian contraceptive methods, but don't get too fascinated because these aren't anything you want to try and recreate. Egyptian women would collect the dung of crocodiles or elephants to mix with sacred herbs and honey. They would then apply this paste mixture to their vulva and up inside the vagina as a protective seal on their genitals. Okay. Men, don't think you're getting much better though, as your contraceptive was to rub onion juice all over your junk. If neither of these worked, which shocker if they didn't, the Egyptians had an herb called silphium, which was used to help devoid a woman of an unwanted pregnancy. They even knew what has been confirmed today, that achia gum from an achia tree worked as a spermicide and would reduce the likelihood of pregnancy after the fact. While it's impressive they figured out what they did, this whole section just has yeast infection written all over it, so let's just keep going for everybody's sake.
Number 5, the Gentleman's Tablet. Hey, at the end of the day, we're only human, and sometimes we do as they do on the Discovery Channel. We wouldn't be here if the people of ancient times did not put on a little Marvin Gaye and just feel the groove, baby. Well, strangely enough, not much has changed since then, and that includes our own curiosity with each other's gabagool. My generation has OnlyFans, the last generation had Playboy and Penthouse, and maybe the Martha Stewart magazine. That woman can do no wrong. Well folks, in ancient Mesopotamia, they needed their fix too. Playboy was a few thousand years away, so the next best thing was these clay tablets depicting actions that my editors are wondering how they're even gonna show you. This ain't junior high health class, y'all know how this works. So did the ancients. It's why there's a few of these tablets floating around and in different positions, taking bricked up to a whole new level.
Number 4, a pillar of flesh. Another empire that rose to prominence in Mesopotamia would be the Assyrian Empire. And the kings here were pretty damn awful. They ruled with bloody iron fists of torture and mass life-ending escapades. One such king, Ashurnasirpal II, inherited a huge, strong army from his father, and using it, he would destroy pretty much anyone who didn't like him in ways that may have left his soldiers with PTSD. Like actually. He burned, blinded, and removed the craniums of rebels, set maidens on fire, and condemned opposing soldiers to die of dehydration in the desert. But I think what may be the worst way he dealt with those who opposed him would be when he flayed all the chiefs who had revolted and built a pillar that he covered with their skin. Hey, I think I feel my lunch coming back up. Andrew, get in here. No.
Number 3, Sumerian suds. If you're like me, then you love a good beer. Frankly, I could drink them ice cold or warm, just like our friends across the pond. Cheers, how are you doing? I'm doing great, thanks for asking. With that being said, I could never enjoy my Canadian lifestyle if it weren't for the Sumerians, as they may have invented the first beer. No more drunk hockey fights, no more coddy weekends in the Muskokas, and no more just sending her buddy. You gotta send her. Being the agricultural revolutionaries that they were, it makes sense that they would discover the fermentation process of wheat. Tablets found in excavations depict people drinking out of large jars that are speculated to be filled with a gorgeous 3.5% brew, which if you ask me, is the best way to enjoy said beverage, with friends around you in a big jar.
Number 2, Gilgamesh. Even if you don't know who it is, it's likely you have heard the name Gilgamesh. In Mesopotamia, Gilgamesh was the hero of Uruk, just like how Big Ched is the hero of my dreams. And in said city, stone tablets and even the art on walls tell his stories and legends. That's Gilgamesh, not Andrew. According to the stories, his mother was thought to be the goddess Ninsun, and his father was, give me a sec here, Lugalbanda, the god king of Uruk. And apparently, this half-man, half-god was the ruler of the city for 126 years, which would be completely insane if it were actually true. It could be, we don't actually know. The second half of the epic poem of Gilgamesh is all about him trying to figure out the meaning of life. And buddy, I mean, same here. We're all just dust in the wind, dude. Dust in the wind.
Number 1, the wheel, the cradle of civilization. There's a lot that happens in Mesopotamia, and Adam and I would need a whole history class to tell you everything that was happening in the Middle East. Maybe one day we'll actually teach a class, who knows? Yeah, maybe that'd be a good idea. But one thing I can tell you is that thanks to ancient Sumerians, we have wheels. Maybe it was a pottery wheel. Maybe it was for a carriage. Maybe it was because we just like to make stuff. I don't know, but I don't think I need to tell you how important wheels are and how they literally reinvented the wheel. It was extremely revolutionary. Boats, floats, doors, stores, drawers, planes, trains, cars, Mars if you count the rover, bikes, flour mills, gears, cogs, clocks, and your 11th grade best friend Buddy. He was wheeling and dealing.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have ambrosia. Said to be the drink of the Greek gods with a flavor of honey, this beverage was delivered to the Olympians by doves, and this is what gave them their immortality. This is an important substance in mythology that is seen many times. Sometimes in the stories, people were given the privilege of drinking it, like in the story of Heracles, but sometimes others would try to steal it, and like we learned before, do not anger the gods or else you'll find yourselves punished like Tantalus, forever trapped, hungry and thirsty, standing in a pool of water he can't drink, under fruit he can't eat. Some mortals in the stories were only teased with the possibility of immortality, just to be turned away at the last second, like the hero Tydeus. He was going to be made immortal by Athena the goddess, but then she caught him eating human brains, so she decided, probably better to not. Mythology is weird. I didn't make this up. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Holy Grail. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far. The Holy Grail is one of the most well-known pieces of Christian mythology. It is said to be the cup or bowl that Jesus drank out of during the Last Supper. Of course, people were trying to get their hands on this relic, and to make it even more revered, it is said to be the vessel in which Joseph caught his blood while he was on the cross. That's heavy stuff, and it's the reason why King Arthur and his knights traveled in search of the Holy Grail. Here's the catch with this thing though. Only the purest souls were able to grasp it, and not many of us can admit that we're the purest of souls. This is why when only one man was able to touch it, it is said that he gained immortality through it. If that was me, I'd tell him to prove it. I mean, real easy to say it when you're the only one who can touch it. Just saying, proof or it didn't happen. Legend says the guy's still eating Mr. Noodles out of it to this day. In our number 8 spot today, we have golden apples. We hear a lot about the golden apples in Greek mythology, but in Norse mythology, they're actually quite an important and often discussed item. The golden apples actually need to be continually eaten by the Norse gods in order to maintain their immortality. The apples also supplied the gods with their strengths as well as their forever youth. The orchard that contained these apples was looked over by the goddess of spring, Idun. The apples are extremely important to the mythology, and in one story, when the goddess gets tricked into giving herself and the apples over to Loki, the gods immediately grew old and weak, but luckily she was returned and everyone's youth was restored. This led people to search for these golden apples at one point, but even if you were to find one of these magic apples, you'd need a constant supply in order to maintain your immortality, and that might be a little bit more difficult than you think. In our number 7 spot today, we have the mushroom of immortality. As early as 475 BC, there are written records that reference the mushroom of immortality, which was a key ingredient in the elixir of life. The lingzi, which is translated to mean supernatural mushroom, is the oldest known mushroom to be used medicinally, which is super cool. According to the Book of Han, people who were masters of esoterica, alchemists, and magicians known as the Fang Shi knew the secret locations on a mountain where these immortality mushrooms grew, but no one else did. This resulted in several Qin and Han emperors to send large expeditions to search for the mushrooms of immortality, but to no avail. While these mushrooms are still used in traditional Chinese medicine today, it doesn't seem as though anyone has been able to actually achieve immortality from them, but maybe we just don't have the correct recipe anymore. In our number 6 spot today, we have Nicholas Flamel. If you're a Harry Potter fan, you've definitely heard this name before, but did you know that the character is actually based off of a real person? Nicholas Flamel lived from 1330 to 1418, and he was a successful French bookseller. What's curious, however, is that about 200 years after his death, there began to be texts that surfaced that were attributed to him. According to these texts, Nicholas had learned secrets of alchemy from Jewish alchemists while traveling in Spain, and it is said that during this time that he acquired the original copy of the Book of Abramelin the Mage. It was then claimed that Nicholas was the one who held the elixir of life as well as the secrets of transmutation, and it was also claimed that he was probably still alive somewhere. Wild stories aside, what is in that book? Clearly people believe that there must be some immortality secrets hidden inside.
Number 5 are the wet nurses. Wet nurses are found in all statuses and were for all statuses. One common denominator though is that the career kind of really sucked. Pun intended. So first, their social status was always determined by the status of who they were breastfeeding. Royal family? Congrats on your special privileges, statues, private quarters, and your own tomb in the family pyramid. Also, her family would receive special perks as an extension of her. Now, royal families only wanted high-status wet nurses, and while it's not clear how they were chosen, evidence suggests some kind of blood tie or faint familiar relation. Most wet nurses were from marginalized families in lower socioeconomic statuses and worked under conditions and pre-definitive wages. Wet nurse requirements for any status were intense. She'd have to have given birth at least twice, have a large but healthy body due to the belief that large bodies were more nourishing. Despite that, her breasts should be medium. Too small, not enough food. Too big, the baby's spoiled. In addition to all of these prerequisites, the wet nurse should be sweet-tempered, affectionate, and responsive to her charge. She should also abstain from intercourse because it could reduce her affection towards a child, and they also said no alcohol. A good call, knowing what we know now. Wet nurses were women exploited for the products of their bodies. As slaves, they were coerced for their milk. As lower social status women, they were employed for their bodies to enhance their inadequate domestic status. Even her own household suffered physically and monetarily if a wet nurse defaulted or failed a contract. On the same page, surrogates are number 4. This is a widespread practice in Egypt. The first story of surrogacy found in Genesis 16 of the Bible was the story of infertile Sarah having Egyptian Hagar carry her child for her and her husband Abraham. Even Egyptian pharaohs had used concubines to produce heirs. They often married their sisters or aunts, and children born of these marriages were most of the time not in great or functional health and wouldn't survive. Any child born of a concubine for a pharaoh was accepted as his lawful offspring. Now, they were quite limited in their rights, and they could only inherit the throne in case of the absence of another more entitled heir. Surrogates experienced similar contracts and status leveling as wet nurses. They were desired to be mothers already, have a bigger, healthier body, and naturally beauty was a desired element as well. Women of low status who made a career of surrogacy often died in childbirth or from hemorrhages due to the repetitive birthing process, but for some, it was the only career they could have. Priestess is number 3, and so while it was a male-dominated field, many women were employed as a priestess or a high priestess at the temples around Egypt. Mostly from upper status, many were married to the priests, which they owed their position in society. Despite this, they played roles in the temple rituals, such as servicing goddesses Hathor, Neith, and Pakhet, or working as dancers, musicians, singers, and acrobats in the temple. The most important priestess was known as the god's wife Amun. This woman was usually the daughter of the pharaoh or sometimes his wife. She usually held a very high position in court and performed important rituals to honor the god Amun. The priestess was in charge of managing the gods' affairs, attending to ritual dances and performances, shaking their rattles and rattling their necklaces, which were long and heavily beaded objects. By the beginning of the New Kingdom in 1550, the title Chantress of Amun was used, and it was usually the wives of the priests who gained these elevated positions as well. The concept of a woman as a priest was unheard of in many kingdoms. A high priestess and the reverence and traditions of female gods being led by women were unusual to outsiders of Egypt, who oftentimes restricted most priestly activities to just men. Number 2 is professional mourners. Okay, so here's a weird one. Professional or paid mourning is an occupation not only found in Egypt, but in China, the Mediterranean, and Eastern Europe. This practice is literally paying a stranger to attend a funeral to lament, deliver a eulogy, help comfort the family, entertain, or lay on the ground wailing. There's some range here, depends on what kind of funeral you want to have. These paid mourners made ostentatious displays, messy hair and smudged makeup, wailing, pounding on the ground or their chests, throwing themselves about as they smeared dirt and sand all over their body while they screamed. It's a full spectacle. Now, another depiction of the paid mourners in Egypt is a little more chill. 2 women impersonating the goddesses Isis and Nephthys. They were believed to play a special role in someone's death. Most inscriptions of a funeral where they are present as paid mourners, they are on each side of the corpse and their bodies are fully shaved. These women also had to be childless and have a tattoo of either Isis or Nephthys' name on their shoulder. Most evidence of professional mourning is seen in pyramids and tomb inscriptions, such as women holding their bodies dramatically in sorrow, braced over a casket with tears flowing. If you were a theater kid, this was definitely the type of job for you. And number 1, it's the female physician. Egypt is a difficult one with historians. There's been a lot of largely ignored discoveries due to the opinions of those who found them. The evidence of women in ancient Egyptian medical fields is part of that because, as it turns out, their physicians were actually primarily women. Evidence shows women in the medical profession going back into early dynastic period Egypt, when Merit Ptah was the royal court's chief physician in 2700 BCE. She was the first female doctor known in world history, but there is another unnamed female physician who is listed to be the head of the Temple Neith Medical School in 3000 BCE, so maybe not. But either way, the first female doctor was was in ancient Egypt. Women were highly respected throughout Egypt's history, and many of their goddesses represented facets of health. Neith has been associated with the invention of birth, and Hathor represents fertility. 4 deities associated with healing are Heka, Sekhmet, Serket, and Nefertum, which are all female. So, bizarre claims you may have heard that no women are involved in Egyptian medicine don't accord with the values of their civilization, which were incredibly equitable. By this reasoning, there were no women involved in anything of note anywhere in the world until the modern era, because history books make no mention of their contributions. But it's all up to say. You've heard it before because it literally affects everything, but being a woman is up first. Likely as a result of the whole Pandora's box fiasco, wherein the first human, Pandora, is gifted a jar by Zeus on her wedding night, and he doesn't tell her, hey, don't open that. There's a bunch of demons in there that will, plague mankind. Pandora pops open her wedding gift, and just like that, Greek sexism is born. Distrust of women was embedded in the ancient Greek collective psyche pretty much from the start. Gender classicist Jaron Auckland describes the Greek opinion of a woman eloquently. Irresistibly beautiful, but parasitic and lazy artifact that sits in the house of a man and eats everything. This sexism floated across the realities of civic life, where women were unable to vote, own land, or inherit property. Females were often abandoned at birth, and girls' education focused more on preparation for child rearing than intellectual stimulation. Medical was laughable, and if a woman had an ailment, she was always to blame for it. Aristotle believed and insisted that women were deformed males, created after something went wrong in the mother's womb. Hilarious, because we now know that's actually quite the reverse, and that the male sex develops after the females. Plato warned men not to turn into women when they reincarnated, best done by finding success in their incumbent lives. And even Pericles said that the best thing about a woman was that she was never spoken about. The life expectancy for an ancient Greece woman was 36, and the average for a man was 45. Currently, the life expectancy for Greek women is 82, and for men, 77. So being a hater sucks the life out of you boys. And while we ride this wave, let's talk about how adultery is worse. Worse than what? Well, literally everything to the Greek. Even worse than being taken against your will, as the Greeks didn't consider that an act of violence against a person rather than property, which is what women were to their husband or father. For that crime, you'd be fined with literal property damage. Adultery? Whoa, as a woman, you'd best bet was to gouge your eyes out so you never see someone hot and feel temptation ever again once that proverbial ring is on your finger. The Greek definition of adultery includes not only engaging with someone outside of your marriage, but also just being an unmarried woman who does the dirty and gets caught. Adultery was seen as a devastating impact on a family unit, which was a vital institute of Greek society. It undermined a household and therefore society. And if you can just undermine your whole empire for some nookie, it makes sense to the Greeks that adulterers could be killed on the spot if they're caught. Not too far of a stretch. If the caught pair contained a married woman, she was immediately and legally divorced from her husband, even if the victim husband wished to stay with her. He could also sell her into slavery if he felt like it. So while you decide what to do with her, remember you can't smoke him, but you can go get like 20 years of pent out anger out on the guy your wife swept with, because now it's your legal right to punish him with radishes. And you can only imagine where the radishes are supposed to go. And on the topic of law in ancient Greece, justice equals personal outrage. We all piss each other off. It happens. People can be abrasive, or they may have rivaling opinions, or sometimes you just talk too fast, and that's what it takes. Regardless of what you do wrong, people will deal with it and move on. If a law gets involved and is broken, there's an appropriate punishment and recourse via court, which is cordial and doesn't involve two people screaming at each other in front of a judge. But that is exactly what court justice looked like in Athens. According to punishment laws, rage was the heart of why someone was punished by society, meaning anyone could bring anything as a charge against someone else. On a hilarious note, that means about 96% of the surviving court documents from Athens features cases which revolved around how much one person just hated another and was trying to convince the court to hate that person too. Laws defined just how much anger was appropriate response for certain actions, and once parties were in court, it was the prosecutor's job to make the jury feel just as angry about something so that punishment could be handed out. And that led to sort of an eye for an eye system, quite literally. So if you were unlikable in ancient Greece, best thing to do is stick to yourself. But I mean, we shouldn't be too hard on them for letting emotion bias their laws, right? Except for the fact that it happened more than once. Next up, people aren't perfect. Democracy was developed by the many ancient indigenous colonies that are found around the world, and its influence grew through history and societies. The Greeks adopted the practice of democracy, and they executed it in a way that makes them famous in history. However, even a system as revered as democracy can find itself utilized for more nefarious purposes. Best example, the Melitinian debate of 427 BC during the Peloponnesian Peloponnesian War, when a city-state of Mytilene had attempted to separate from the Athenian Empire. The revolt failed epically, however, and the Mytileans were forced to awkwardly submit to Athens again, like a Quebec-Canada scenario. So it's up to the Athenians to decide what punitive measures to take to really teach these guys and make an example of them. According to Thucydides, it was in the fury of the moment that they decided to execute not only the prisoners they'd taken to Athens, but also the entire adult male population of Mytilene, and then the women and the children would be taken into servitude. They send a boat off with these orders, but as they're watching it float away over the horizon, they maybe have it click in that their decision to pretty much burn an entire city to the ground might have been made in haste. So since they've got so much time on their hands, they issued another debate on the subject just to be sure. A new vote was taken, and it was decided that only the prime movers in the rebellion, 1,000 people, would be killed instead of 100,000 people. A second ship is sent off to catch the first and reach them at Mytilene itself just seconds before the sentence is carried out. So, democracy, pros and cons. Another reason to hate living here aside from biased politics is that medical kills, because it wasn't until the 5th century BC that Greek physicians started looking at illness as something based in science. Before, the state of the human body was at the whim of the gods. So what that meant for a patient pre-science medicine is you'd visit shrines and temples and participate in rituals called temple sleep and incubation, wherein you slept at the temple, told the priest your dreams in the morning, and he'd either deem you cured or recommend you just do this again. And yeah, if you die, I guess. I don't know. Then, when science medicine came along, you needed 0 certification to advertise being a physician. Quite simply, medicine in ancient Greece was based around the idea that the human body was composed of a range of fluids. A good doctor was supposed to know each of these separate fluids, what they looked like and what they tasted like, and that's it. Feel sick? Yak in a cup, let your doctor take a swig, and he'll tell you what he thinks is up. Hippocrates said healthy urine should taste like fig juice. One less juice I am now going to try and lice. Unsurprisingly, treatments were just as disgusting as these ancient methods of diagnostics. In most cases, a doctor would prescribe a session of bloodletting to drain the body of bad blood, and anything wrong with a woman could be solved with meal dung mixed into wine. Yum. But their methods certainly might have been disgusting. Written histories from the time often make mention of people living beyond the age of 100, so maybe they were onto something.
Number 5. Lamb brains. Ooh, gross. Okay, lambs are not my favorite, but it's not that bad. I can see why people like it. The right preparation would yield a delicious and nutritious meal. Especially like roasted over a fire or something. I hear lamb's pretty good that way. I've never had it that way, but I hear it's good. Lamb's brains, however, I don't know, man. Remember that scene from Hannibal where Anthony Hopkins cuts open the skull from the guy from Goodfellas, and you get to see inside his brain and how the Goodfella thinks? The mafia joke. Oh look, there's the prefrontal cortex. Look at all those memories of beatings and extortion. Oh wow. All jokes aside, it's a gross scene, and I can't help but not forget about it when thinking of lamb brains. Well, the Romans, they loved them. Romans enjoyed lamb brains in a variety of ways, from cured, boiled, baked, and more. One Apicius recipe even calls for lamb brain, eggs, pepper, and rose petals. So you never have too many rose petals. Number 4, sow's womb. It's exactly how it sounds. I know, it's just another part of the animal, but some pieces, well, they just don't taste like the other do. They kinda taste worse. And when there's no yieldy Taco Bell, your options get stretched thinner than a contortionist who's out of a job and working street corners. So it makes sense to use all the parts of the animal, which I certainly hope they are. I certainly wouldn't want any to go to waste. While not as common as other dishes on this list, you would find the sow's womb prepared with various spices and oftentimes a mixture of vinegar and honey. I don't know if those go together. I don't know if that's, and I think sow is, I believe, is pig, by the way, too. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. Pig or a hog or something like that. Sorry. Number 3, giraffe. I mean, okay, such peaceful animals and just all necks. Is neck even that good to eat? I don't know. Has anyone ever had giraffe before? I don't know. Another animal considered to be very exotic for the time, even back then. Sometimes they would even find their way into the arena to fight themselves or other animals like lions. Kinda crazy. If you've ever seen a giraffe fight before, you know how brutal they can be. It's basically who can whip their neck back and forth the hardest and the fastest. Scientists uncovering artifacts from an ancient restaurant in Pompeii found remains of a giraffe leg, so it actually may be more common than we think it was. Number 2, jellyfish. Squidward. There's only two things I know about jellyfish. One, in SpongeBob, jellyfish produce a most delicious jelly, hence the name, and that goes on a Krabby Patty. Remember that episode? It's one of my favorites. Two, jellyfish got some nasty stingers, some of which can prove to be lethal, and no amount of Bear Grylls knowledge and urine can save you. He pees on them. I saw him do it once, and now I always remember that if I get to pee on it, but apparently that's not how you do it. Anyway, jellyfish were most likely not eaten every day on everyone's diet. However, there are mentions of it in some Roman writings. Apicius' cookbook is the best collection of ancient Roman recipes to ever survive. It mentions of a jellyfish omelet as an appetizer. Although I gotta say, I don't know if jelly and egg go together like that. Chris is saying no too. That's a weird one. Number 1, blood pudding. Oof. This one I know that we still eat today and some cultures love it, but there's just something about the blood for me, personally. I can't get over it. I get lightheaded thinking about blood and the taste. Well, I think I'd rather suck on an iron girder. Well, I called the chief, who was a world-class chef, and he said, it ain't it. Roman blood pudding, or sausage, was prepared by mixing a very readily available resource of lifeblood and fat and oats to make for a very loving, tasty meal. Oh god. Sometimes it was even put into sausage form with animal innards. Just cause, go ahead, fry those bad boys up. Cook them up for me. You love this. Oh, I can't even say it, dude. It's so gross. Just go ahead and cook those bad boys up. It sounds great. I promise I won't puke at the dinner table.
Number 10. Great Death Pit. If you were a Sumer king, you likely professed yourself a god and or a superhuman demigod. As such, your followers and members of court were required to treat you as such, with a level of devotion Andrew saves only for his collection of empty drink bottles he keeps at his desk. Can you please clean that up?
Hey!
What I'm sure Andrew doesn't expect from those empty bottles is that when he bites the dust, they too must do the same to accompany him to the afterlife. Sumerian kings absolutely did. The biggest example of this ritualistic offing would be the Great Pit of Delifing, discovered in 1922, which was the resting place of approximately 1,800 people, all of which served different kings and queens in the Sumerian capital city of Ur. Some of these followers may have been poisoned, others had a less than ceremonious demise as they had prominent holes in what should be rather intact parts of their skulls.
Number 9, hanging gardens. Here's a quote from Greek philosopher Strabo. The ascent to the highest stories by stairs, and at their side are water engines, by means of which persons appointed expressly for the purpose, and are continually employed in raising water from the Euphrates into the garden. Namaste. Yes, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon! I said it twice. Oh my goodness, must be kind of cool. What a magnificent sight it must have been. A magnificent construction of beauty. Even predating the pyramids of Giza by a rough estimate of 5,000 years. We'll get to that later. Trouble is, this one is kind of a gray area. Here's the later. It could be completely made up by Strabo and others like him. Or it could have been destroyed, as there are some depictions of a garden existing in a grand palace on the river Tigris near modern day Mosul, but we're just not sure. We're not exactly sure. So, beautiful gardens, I hope they were there.
Number 8, Sumer. The Sumerians were the oldest known civilization in Mesopotamia. They created the first cities, and a large part of their success and the success of the Mesopotamians in general was due to the invention of irrigation. The land around the Tigris and Euphrates was not so great. It was fertile but prone to flooding pretty often. The solution was to divert water from canals into irrigation ditches. The Mesopotamians realized that the water supply from rivers was unreliable, so they dug a maze of ditches from the rivers to their fields. This created a reliable water source for farming. The crops fed the population, and farmers were able to trade the excess produce such as onions, garlic, apples, figs, grapes, and pomegranates. That's how the Mesopotamians really flourished.
Number 7, Hammurabi's Law. Law students and those taking the bar, rejoice, because I am talking about Hammurabi's Code. When folks were flocking into cities for the first time, the crime rate would have been something to take note of. Yeah. King Hammurabi made his code of laws, 282 to be exact, to give justice to all. Like in the commercial sector, for example, for those who steal. The principle of an eye for an eye, to make the punishment fit the crime. If you were caught stealing, then perhaps the removal of your arm that stole shall be an acceptable response. Now look, I'm not out here defending crooks. Don't steal, it's bad. But these laws, a little too cruel for me. I'd go through all of them, but, well, you need to get back to your bar exam, so good luck out there, folks. I know you can do it.
Number 6, the Akkadian Empire. You know you're a big deal when it hasn't been done before you. The Akkadian Empire was literally the first ever empire. They were around for about 100 years and first came to be around 4,300 years ago. And they were big on improving roads and irrigation. Only problem is that irrigation doesn't really help you out much when it stops raining for 290 years. The large southern part of the empire was pretty dependent on the northern part for most, or more like all, of its crops and food. So when a drought struck and took away the food, a panicking northern population went to seek help from their southern brethren, who, in return for all the years of food, put up walls to keep them out. Boom, an inciting incident for a violent conflict that brings down an empire. It's that simple, kiddos.
Number 5, trial by ordeal. Trial by ordeal of water was insane. It's honestly hilarious to think of. It was a medieval method of determining guilt or innocence. Now the accused would be thrown into a body of water, often a river or a pond, something dirty back then, and if they floated, well, it was believed that God was protecting them and that they were innocent. But if they sank, however, well, they were deemed guilty. They were naughty, right? This practice was based on the belief that water, being a pure element created by the Lord, would reject impurities such as sin. And it was also thought that drowning was an acceptable punishment for those who were deemed guilty. Because, yeah, sure. The trial by ordeal of water was widely used throughout Europe during the Middle Ages and continued until the early modern period. So yeah, it lasted a while. However, it was eventually abolished due to its high mortality rate and, well, lack of reliability in determining guilt or innocence. It was a bunch of bullshit. Who knew? Water rejects impurities. That would be jarring. You try and have a bath, you just get launched out, and you're like, oh, okay then. Gotcha. Heard. Number 4, the lead sprinkler. The lead sprinkler device dates back to medieval times, as all these great gadgets do, and it was used as a form of punishment for those who committed crimes such as heresy or treason. The device consisted of a hollow metal sphere with a long handle. It looks like something you'd get from Elden Ring. It's like a weird looking wand, I don't know. It was then filled with molten lead or boiling oil. You already know where I'm going with this one. The Punisher would then hold the sphere over the victim's naked body, always naked again, and then allow the hot liquid to drip through small holes onto your skin, causing severe burns and excruciating pain. Now, over time, variations of the lead sprinkler were developed, including ones with multiple spouts to, increase the amount of liquid being poured onto victim or victims. Yeah, they got creative. Just the thing you want to hear in this kind of list. They toyed around with some ideas, sure. Number 3, the guillotine. A classic, not quite ancient, but we gotta mention it. First seen in France during the late 18th century as an alternative to other forms of capital punishment, all those other horrible versions. Those were seen as cruel and inhumane, but this one, dare I say, changed the game. It quickly became the preferred method of execution in France and was used extensively throughout the French Revolution to execute thousands of people, including King Louis XVI and his queen, Marie Antoinette. The guillotine's popularity spread throughout Europe, with several countries adopting it as their primary means of capital punishment. They're like, hey, that looks pretty cheap and horrible, let's do that. It continued to be used until the mid-20th century when most countries abolished capital punishment altogether. Now, despite its gruesome reputation, some argue that the guillotine was a humane method of execution because it was quick and painless compared to the other 9 that I've mentioned on this list. Oh my god. Number 2, the thumb screw. This one, for some reason, this one hits me the most. Thumb screws were a method of inflicting pain by crushing the fingers or the toes, or sometimes the knees. They would make massive thumb screws. Knee screws almost. The victim's digits were inserted into the screw and then it was slowly tightened, causing, of course, excruciating pain and potentially permanent damage. This form of punishment was commonly used during medieval times, of course, and as means of extracting information. Yeah, if you do that to me, I'll say anything in 4 minutes or less. It was also seen during the Spanish Inquisition to force confessions from those suspected of heresy. Thumb screws were often made of iron or brass and could be adjusted to increase or decrease pressure on your body. Anywhere. Like I said earlier, they would get creative with where they would put these screws of death. Not good. Despite its brutal nature, thumbscrew torture remained in use for centuries before eventually falling out of favor due to its, well, extreme cruelty. At what point do you decide, right? Like some guy's like, you know what? It's a little bit too much. Let's get this one. We're just gonna put them in the coffin for now. Thumb screws are so old. And finally, number 1, cement shoes. We'll end on a 20th century mafia punishment because why not, all right? I wrote the thing. I can talk about what I want. Let's do it. You made it this far too. We'll end on a not horrible one. Cement shoes involved placing the victim's feet in, well, as you could guess, buckets filled with wet concrete. which then of course hardens around their feet. Science right there, that's how that works. Unless you have a moving truck thing, then that cement's gonna dry pretty fast. At that point, you're unable to move or escape, and the victim is then thrown into a body of water to sink down and drown. This brutal technique was popularized by organized crime groups and mafias and stuff like that back in the early 20th century as a way to dispose of informants or those who had betrayed the group. Betrayed the mafia. The first recorded use of cement shoes was in New York City in 1935 when 2 victims were found dead with their feet encased in concrete. Yeah, new fear unlocked. I never knew. There we go.
And at number 10 is jewelry making. Egyptians saw deep spiritual significance in their jewelry, but also had a love of aesthetics. And those two things combined to create some of the most unique and lavish jewelry found in history. Worn to ward off spirits, protect health, bring good luck, and more, there were even certain colors and designs that were associated to certain gods and powers. And so Egyptian jewelers followed very strict rules regarding the mystical aspects of their jewelry creations. While a woman usually would not be a metal worker in Egyptian society, it was very common for her to be making jewelry. The tools were smaller and the process required less heat and thus less danger for her. Metalwork techniques included precious metal sheets that were cut and shaped, notched together. Wire work was accomplished through strip twisting. Pieces could be held together with this wire stripping system or crimping techniques. These strips were also how link chains were accomplished, as well as the securing of beads or the backs of earrings. And for jewelry designed exclusively for burial, the metal was often quite thin, as the jewelry of the deceased was not subjected to the wares of everyday life. Precious stones, ivory, real flowers, and shells were all common ornaments, as was name engravements, but it was more common with royalty. Jewelry makers were women of high status due to these contributions and the revelry jewelry held in ancient Egypt. For number 9, it's house vendors. Recognized as an ancient heritage profession and was at its most popular during time periods of ancient Egypt where women were restricted from going out when married. These vendors would roam neighborhoods with buckets and baskets of product for sale. Clothing, perfume, fabrics, snacks. Now, what was unusual is that the vendor was more often women than men, walking the streets alone, making these sales because many married women weren't allowed to go out walking the streets alone to make sales. You see the irony. Anyways, this profession found great popularity in single women, and many also were called upon to act as nurses in homes of the wealthy when needed. The career is named al-Dalala, but the idea itself has long been extinct with the freedom for Egyptian women to roam commercial districts. Number 8 is being a dancer. Ancient Egyptians loved their music and dance. They were celebratory, but also ritualistic at times. Farmers would dance to thank the gods for a good harvest. Dance groups would perform at banquets. People would go dance around the Nile in the lush season. The list goes on. Many men and women chose dance as a career, and it was a highly respected one. Dancing was considered an acceptable and normal part of life and even important to it. Most festivals were incomplete without it. In fact, dancing was such a revered career that dancers could start as a peasant and become a high status person from it, just like being a celebrity in the way that people would go to see them perform. Women at the time were even more revered for their grace, elegance, and acrobatics. This career had 7 types of dance: gymnastic, movement, pair dancing, imitative dance, which was like acting like animals, group dances like a historic cheerleading squad, dramatic dance was female exclusive and rested in illustration, war dances, grotesque dance, and then religious chant dances at temples, and lyrical dance, which was usually a depiction of lovers. Wig makers are number 7. Egyptians loved wigs for a reason that surprises many. It helped keep their heads cool. I mean, it also helped with hygiene and scalp pests and looking pretty, but the heat thing is what really gets folks. Many Egyptians had shaved or cropped hair, and the mesh-like base of a wig versus a headscarf allowed the body heat to still escape. And as said, wigs were also a great shield from lice or other invasive bugs. The hair used in the construction of wigs and hair extensions was always human and was either an individual's own hair or had been traded or bought. Hair itself was a valuable commodity ranked alongside gold and incense in a count list from the town of Kahun, which put emphasis on the popularity of wigs. When hair was collected for a wig, it was thoroughly combed and then sorted into lengths individually. The Egyptians invented a variety of hairdressing tools, and the wig makers would take the time to braid or coil the hair depending on the wig style, coating each with warm beeswax and resin fixative so that it would harden when cooled. The job itself isn't unusual, more so the booming industry it had. Wigs weren't worn to this extent anywhere else at the time, and while yes, they were functional against the sun, they were more so aesthetic than anything. clothing. Individual braid and extensions could also be attached to someone's scalp for aesthetics, the way that box braids, twists, faux locks, and many other ethnic hairstyles are accomplished today. Wigs were made in a type of factory setting. Archaeologists have uncovered the remains of wig factories, wig boxes have been found in tombs, and multiple mummies have been found with wigs or braided in extensions. Number 6, we meet our ladies of the night. Unlike most ancient and even modern civilizations, selling intercourse is illegal or was highly governed. In ancient Egypt, this wasn't even close to the case, but rather the opposite in a peculiar way. Women who worked in the sexual industries were considered divine and respectable, as their career was considered to please the gods. They earned high status and lived in luxury. Working freely and openly, these ladies adorned themselves with red lipstick and eye makeup that differentiated themselves from other women. They were also tattooed, diamond-shaped dots along the thighs and on the fingers, or images of the god Bes. When the French invaded, they brought STIs, and they spread rapidly through the brothels, and this prompted the French authorities to introduce a law forbidding French troops from entering the brothels or having these ladies in their rooms. Guess those ladies were hard to resist, because anyone who offended the law received death penalty.
Number 5. Play that lyre to the fire. While we're talking about Nero, he actually has a mystery all of his own. Nero was very famously a fan of music. He would often sing and play instruments, and he was also a fan of being utterly insane. Ending lives and forcing people to party all night, have massive parties, and eat until they puked. So when you hear a rumor that this crazy emperor may have caused the Great Fire of Rome that destroyed a lot of the city on July 18th in the year 64, you might believe it. And you might even believe the rumor that he also played the lyre while the city burned. It just kind of all checks out for how crazy he is, but obviously we have no evidence of that actually happening. Neither of those two rumors can be proven, especially not now, 1,958 years later. What we do know is that the emperor did benefit quite a bit from the destruction the fire caused. It allowed him to change the aesthetics of the city, persecute thousands of Christians, and introduce new building codes. It also turns out Nero may have been 35 miles away in Antium, but I mean, prove it! You can't. I can't. Number 4. Ham Hill. Ham Hill in England is the location of an archaeological dig by the universities of Cambridge and Cardiff, where we made the crazy discovery of the graves of a lot of people, dating back to the time in history when Romans made their way into England. The part that is so alarming, other than finding a pile of corpses, is that these particular bodies had been stripped of their exterior layers and chopped up. It's gruesome. But oddly, most of the skeletons found here actually belong to women, and most of which were women in their early 20s. But this wouldn't be a mystery if those were all the facts. We actually don't know what happened here. The obvious answer is some kind of mass life-ending escapade, but why, damn it, why? We don't know. Number 3. Hard Talker. Surprise! You've met the afterlife. Were you a good person? Well, if you weren't, if you were a threat to your community, say in ancient Rome, then it's pretty likely you would have been buried face down. So there, take that. Hold up, they cut out your tongue and put a stone in your mouth? What in the Gaius Octavius Caesarion? What is going on here? That's probably what the team who unearthed the grave of a man from a Northamptonshire site dating back to Roman Britain probably said. They found a man who was buried face down in his grave, missing his tongue with a stone in its place. Pretty odd. Infection in the bones of his jaw show it was removed while he was still alive. And the practice of replacing a missing body part with another object was definitely known to happen in Roman Britain, although it was rather rare. The only thing is we have absolutely no idea what this man had done. Maybe he just really talked too much. Maybe he lost his tongue to something completely unrelated to his delifing, and this stone was just to replace it. We don't actually know, and there is no evidence to tell us. Theories? Number 2. Skulls of London. I'm not really sure how this happens, how it was discovered, or anything, but in 1988, 39 skulls were excavated really close to the Museum of London in London. Those 39 skulls were alarming enough, but the 39 soon expanded into hundreds of skulls. Now, possible theories included that the skulls belonged to executed criminals, gladiators, or even soldiers that had done the Monty Python, run away! Most of the skulls seem to have been from men, and most indicated that they suffered rather brutal offings. Some people think the skulls were dumped in display pits. Some people think they were placed there purposely. To make matters worse, Not too far away, we also discovered what seems to be an ancient Roman cooking pot with bits of humans in it. All of this creepy stuff was found in an area no bigger than a swimming pool, which makes it very obvious that it was all a part of the same thing. Possibly part of some crazy Roman cult. Maybe it's all just a big coincidence. We don't have the evidence to know. I don't think I could really tell you exactly what in the name of Mark Antony went on here, but I do know that it were not good. Number 1. Mole warfare. Who would have thought chemical warfare would make for a great story? Especially 2,000-year-old ancient chemical warfare. Back in the Roman city of Dura Europus in Syria, a siege took place between the Roman and the Persian forces. During said battle, the Persians dug siege tunnels underneath the walls of the Roman city. The Romans knew and built their own tunnels to cut them off. Problem with tunnels like that is you have absolutely no idea of where exactly the opposing team is going to show up. The Romans ended up building their tunnel higher than the Persians did, so you got like this kind of situation going on. Now, archaeological digs have discovered about 19 Roman soldiers in these tunnels. But it seems that these soldiers were not stabbed to cause their demise, but instead, they seem to have suffocated. Well, how the heck did that happen? According to archaeologist Simon James, he believes that the Persians actually allowed the Romans to dig into their tunnel, and then use the elevated position with a sort of chimney effect to set a mix of bitumen and sulfur on fire and let the fumes do the deed. But, and say it with me, there is absolutely no evidence of this. Yes, good, you've caught on. Very nice.
Number 10, stuffed dormice. This list is going to be kind of tough even for a meat eater like me. Dormice are small rodent animals found in the old world like Europe and Africa and Asia. The old world, you get it. But just as common as your American house mouse. As it turns out, they were a favorite of Roman cuisine. Oh god, the horror. Sometimes they were even fattened up for a better meal. The recipe goes as follows, because I just know the folks at home are salivating at the mouth wanting to try this. Get your farm fresh dormouse, empty its cavity, and stuff it with an assortment of other meats and spices. Oh, beautiful, magnifique, and sometimes dipped in honey. Like stuffed jalapenos, except they're from hell. Mice are also known for not being the cleanest animals on earth, so I'm gonna hard pass on this one, brother. No thanks. Number 9, sea urchins. Until today, I had never seen what the inside of a sea urchin looked like. I just never did. That's when our most handsome boy Adam said, let me show you. Weird creatures, or at least to my North American palate they are. Very strange looking. Plus, when they were opening those bad boys up, it just looked like it was too much effort for a little bit of orange looking meat. Strange. Well, Romans, being geographically located in the Mediterranean Sea, found themselves around a lot of these bad boys and started to crack them open. I saw a technique with 2 spoons, but well, I feel like a couple good bashes from a Roman sword ought to do the trick. All the things in this list, this is probably the least gross. Although, I gotta say, when you see a spiky thing in the water like that, and the first guy was like, we should eat this. It's so weird. Why would you do this? It doesn't look edible. Number 8, flamingo tongue. Excuse me? I said, looking very cute at the computer researching this topic. Curb your tongue, internet, I said. I do not believe you. Alas, as cute and as blue and innocent as my eyes are, it was true. Romans were eating flamingo tongues. Ugh. Flamingos were associated with luxury, wealth. I mean, they are a strange color and it's close to purple. Romans love purple, and compared to the rest of the animal kingdom, it just doesn't really fit in. So yeah, sure, it makes sense. Well, the opulence in Rome loved flamingos and their tongues. My only hope is that they used all the birds. In my research, it said that poor citizens did when given the opportunity, but I just can't see the wealthy chopping tongues, and that's it. Hors d'oeuvres, anyone? Number 7, garum. Alright, if you're like me, you're a meat and potatoes kind of guy. When I was growing up, and I probably will be until I'm 80 in a senior home. That's just the way I am. Now, that being said, you can't have hockey pucks on the barbecue without her best friend, her luscious red lover, Heinz number 57 ketchup. Am I right, Chris? Oh, of course. Exactly. And yes, Mom, I can tell the difference, thank you very much. Well, meet the Roman ketchup that would be included at a lot of meals. Almost all of them, apparently. Garum. You take fish blood and fish guts and you pack a whole bunch of salt into it and stir it up until it looked like the forbidden tomato paste. You spread that bad boy out on a wooden plank, let it dry out in the sun for a week, and bada bing, bada boom, baby, you're in Rome. You got yourself an apparent delicious condiment for every meal. Apparently it was at a lot of meals, which is Can't imagine that being very good. Salted fish guts. Oof. Number 6, ostrich. I like chicken just as much as the next guy. Matter of fact, maybe I like it more than the next guy. Any chef will tell you a fresh and properly prepared chicken goes a long way. You can make soup, stew, pasta, fried chicken, baked barbecue, roasted chicken, casserole, chicken burgers. I mean, she's flexible. You can do a lot of stuff, and she's just so versatile. Now, the question is ostrich as flexible? I doubt it. They were an exotic bird even back then, and apparently one emperor liked to shoot their heads with arrows for fun. That was part of the fun and games, yay. Okay, sometimes I can't believe the stuff I read. I'd say this is probably the second least grossest thing on the list, but I don't even know where to get ostrich. And honestly, to even try, I feel like a weirdo Googling that. Where do I get ostrich meat? I don't know. It just doesn't feel right.
Imagine a time and a place where asking some folks, hey, you want to get dinner and drinks, would get you executed. The Han food restrictions. The Han dynasty had some fickle little food laws and regulations, it appears, and for some reason they had wild punishments for them. For example, the law stipulates that dinner without a valid reason will be fined if caught, and if there's beef on the table, it will be cut directly. Does that do something to the beef? I don't get that part. I also don't get the part where between 206 BC and 220 CE, having a few drinks with the boys could get you literally decapitated. The law stated that if 3 or more people got together to drink, the participants would be fined 4 tals of gold. If you're unable to pay, obviously you faced severe consequences, because why can you afford to drink but not pay a fee? The only exception to this rule were gatherings such as weddings, funerals, and festivals. Many rulers and dynasties attempted to regulate the consumption of alcohol in some part because making alcohol required grains like rice, and that supply was often short. Rulers also feared that drunken civilians could easily turn disorderly and violent and cause some peace issues. Can't talk unusual and freaky without bringing up the Mongols and their Yasa law. The Yasa decrees are only available to us through secondary sources, as there's no comprehensive Mongol scroll or codex found so far. Naturally, this can be problematic, and our knowledge of Yasa law is nothing like the older code of Hammurabi. This is due to the fact they weren't literate, so yeah, the laws were told verbally. What we know of Yasa, declared by Genghis himself, is it concerned itself with people, not property, and aimed for 3 things: obedience to Genghis Khan, a binding together of nomenclats, and merciless punishment of wrongdoing. Nowadays we've managed to collect some of their laws together, and I'm gonna read you some of this list. So we have urinating in water or ashes is punishable by death. One may not dip their hands into water and must instead use a vessel for drawing water. Probably a hygiene thing, but at least it's not death, you know? It's forbidden to wash clothing until completely worn out, and don't forget, when you do go to wash them, it's forbidden to bathe or wash garments in running water during thunder. I can't make sense of that one. And then also there's the one where parents can arrange a marriage between their children even if one or both are already dead. But the weirdest thing aren't even the articles, it's the penalties. Only death is ever specified as a consequence. Adultery, death. Take someone against their will, death. Peeing in water, death. Don't answer con calls, death. Giving out food or clothing to captives, death. Death, 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 death. Now, it also includes some pretty chill laws, like Genghis ordered that all religions to be respected and no preference be shown to any of them. So, I mean, you win some, you lose some. Up next is like country boys at Boots and Hearts. You gotta chug, chug, chug. This law and punishment comes to us from the Sui dynasty of China, which the duration was 581 to 618 BC. If you've seen some of my videos about ancient China, you may know that getting into the royal court for work could be pretty blessed for you, your biddy, and any kids or family you have. Some parents went as far as to snip their kids' junk so they could potentially be a eunuch for their emperor in the future. If you don't want to do that, you could always take the imperial exam, the Keiju, which theoretically allows anyone in the country to become a government official. But failing the test was not without consequence, especially if you weren't neat. According to the Book of Sui, the official historical records of the Sui dynasty, the laws stipulated that examinees with bad handwriting would be punished by being forced to drink 1 sheng of ink, aka a literal liter. Don't think you can drop out either once you learn that and you know you can't improve your handwriting in time. The penalty for dropping out is also to chug down some ink. Why so extreme over some exams? Well, exam answers were in theory written by the emperor, even though in practice his officials would be the ones doing the grading. So even if the emperor didn't see it, bad handwriting indicated disrespect to him, the son of heaven. Also, if you failed the examination, guess what your punishment is? Drink some more ink. Had to throw something violently nauseating in on this list at some point, so we got death by Dumbo. This is gonna be rough, you guys, and it makes it obvious colonies of Asia were not effing around. Hope you're ready. So, elephants were used to crush and even gore criminals to death in medieval South and Southeast Asia. This method was popular in India from the Mughal period into the late 19th century. The criminals were laid down either face down, a blessing, I imagine, or face up to see their incoming demise, which was wild, angry elephants, who ran over them repeatedly, ensuring a quick yet very painful death. The most common form, however, was mano a mano, when a convict was laid down and an elephant walked over to the execution site by the handlers and deliberately made to stamp on the torso or head. Elephants are clever creatures, and reportedly they could be taught to slice and gore criminals to death with pointed blades fitted to their tusks. Imagine an elephant in a blind rage running at you with butcher knives duct taped to its tusks, because that's literally what their last moments would have been like. Alright, let's talk mud now. Not any old mud, it's mud. The glorious mud. Gonna say mud way too much, it's gonna feel made up. So, execution by suffocation was a common practice of the ancients. Look at hanging, or whack stuff, like water torment. However, in the medieval period, a very strange kind of suffocation technique was used called mud, the glorious mud. And yes, you have to say it like that, so follow me on screen. Mud, the glorious mud. Yay! Okay, I'll stop. So, some historians tell us that criminals would be killed by throwing him or her into a pit of stinky mud, usually also packed with human filth and feces, because this is medieval Europe. The convict would either die by drowning or by suffocation. However, this was also a common accidental death for the exhausted armor-laden soldiers laying injured on battlefields. Anyways, being drowned or suffocated in mud for punishment does seem to have been rare, thankfully, primarily known to happen in the Burgundy region of France, where it was a punishment reserved specifically for women who left their husbands.